The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Harlan Voss decided to remind everyone in Redstone Valley exactly who held the power. He rode up to the Caldwell gate at noon, not quietly, not with any pretense of courtesy, with 3 men at his back and a smirk already settled on his face like it had been there since birth. He did not knock. He pushed the gate open with the flat of his boot from horseback, let it swing hard enough to crack against the post, and then he just sat there in the saddle while the noise echoed across the yard. The housekeeper, old Mrs. Pruitt, came to the door, and he looked straight through her like she was glass. "Tell Caldwell," Harlan said, loud enough that 2 ranch hands near the water trough turned and stared, "that the offer expires Friday. After Friday, I buy the water rights through the county commissioner, and he can watch his cattle die thirsty." Mrs. Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Friday," Harlan said again. Then he pulled his horse around and rode back through the gate he had broken without closing it behind him. That is the kind of man Harlan Voss was. He never needed to shout. He just needed to make sure you understood that your choices were the ones he had already decided for you. If you have ever felt the ground shift under your feet when someone with power decides your life is a problem they want solved, stay with this story. Because what happened next at the Caldwell Ranch is the kind of thing that reminds you that power is not always the thing it pretends to be. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We tell stories like this every week, stories about real human struggle, real turning points, real moments where ordinary people find something extraordinary inside themselves. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Redstone Valley, to a man who had built everything and still managed to lose what mattered most. Ethan Caldwell had not always been a man who ate alone. There was a time, not so long ago that he had forgotten it, but long enough that it felt like another man's life, when the kitchen of the main house had been the loudest room on the property. Vivian had cooked with both oven doors open even in summer, claiming the heat helped the bread rise faster, which Ethan was fairly certain was not true, but never argued because it made her happy, and she made the best bread he had ever eaten. Lily had been 5 or 6, small enough that she had to pull a stool to the counter to reach the mixing bowls. Nathan had been 8 and already convinced that helping with bread was beneath him, but he would always appear in the kitchen right around the time something came out of the oven, casual as a cat. That kitchen used to smell like something worth coming home to. Now it smelled like nothing in particular, which was somehow worse than if it had smelled bad. Mrs. Pruitt kept it clean. She was good at clean. She was less good at warm, and she knew it, and she did not pretend otherwise. She cooked what kept people alive and left the table set and went to her room by 7, and that was the arrangement, and it worked in the way that a clock with a cracked face still tells time. Ethan ate at the head of the table every evening with the chair to his left empty and the chair to his right where Lily sat and Nathan across from her, and none of them talked much except about the ranch. That was safe. The ranch was practical. The ranch did not require him to feel anything except the particular exhaustion of a man responsible for several thousand acres and 200 head of cattle and 11 full-time employees and a reputation that had taken 20 years to build. He had built a lot of things with those 20 years. He was 38 years old, and he had built what most men in Redstone Valley would have called an empire, which embarrassed him when people used that word out loud, but he did not correct them anymore because correcting people costs energy. He had stopped spending on things that did not matter. What mattered was the land. What mattered was the cattle. What mattered was that Lily finished her schoolwork and Nathan did not get into any more fights in town, and the water rights that Harlan Voss was currently trying to peel away from him, like skin from an apple, did not end up in the wrong hands. The water rights were the thing he was thinking about when Harlan came through his gate on Tuesday. He had been in the East Barn going over a section of fence line with his foreman, Deke Hargrove, a broad-shouldered man from Oklahoma with the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades looking into the sun, when one of the younger hands, a boy named Corbin, who could not yet grow a proper mustache, came running with the message. He delivered it word for word because Corbin was nothing if not literal, and Ethan listened to the whole thing without changing his expression. Deke waited. "Friday," Ethan said finally. "That's 4 days," Deke said. "I know how many days are in a week." Deke pushed his hat back on his head. "What do you want to do?" What Ethan wanted to do was not something he could do without consequences. He had a temper that he kept on a fairly short chain these days, and he was aware of it, and mostly he managed it, but Harlan Voss had a specific gift for finding the places where the chain attached to the post and tugging on them. They had grown up in the same county. They had competed for the same contracts, the same land, the same respect from men who took a long time to give it. Harlan had married well and divorced badly, and spent the years since making sure everyone around him felt the shrapnel. The water rights issue was not complicated in legal terms. Ethan's claim was older and cleaner. But Harlan had gotten to the county commissioner first, which meant the legal process was going to move like cold honey through a sieve, and in the meantime, if Harlan could file the right injunctions and tie things up through winter, the Caldwell cattle would have a problem. "I need a lawyer in the capital," Ethan said. "Send a wire tomorrow morning." "Already sent one last week." Ethan looked at him. "Figured you'd say that eventually," Deke said, without apology. "Fine." Ethan handed back the fence post he'd been holding. "What else?" "Mrs. Pruitt gave notice this morning." He stopped. Deke had the decency to look at the fence post instead of at him. "Says her sister in Colorado is sick and she needs to go. She's sorry and all. She said to tell you that specifically she's sorry, but she's leaving end of the week." End of the week. Same as Harlan's deadline. Ethan had once read a book. Vivian had pressed it into his hands and told him it would do him good, about how the Romans believed some periods of time were cursed, and he had thought at the time that was foolish superstition. But standing in his east barn on a Tuesday in October with the fence line unfinished and the water rights in jeopardy and his housekeeper quitting, he found himself reconsidering. "All right," he said. "I'll post a notice in town," Deke said. "Cook and housekeeper. Live in if they want the room off the back porch." "Fine. You want me to be particular about it? Any requirements?" Ethan looked out the barn door at the long view of his land, the dry grass and the October light, and the way the sky sat flat and heavy on the hills to the west. 200 cattle, 11 men, 2 children who deserved better than another stranger who wouldn't stay. "Just find someone who can cook," he said, "and who means to stay." Eliza Vane read the notice 3 times before she folded it and put it in her coat pocket. She had been standing at the edge of the Redstone General Store's posting board, which was a piece of rough pine nailed to the outside wall where people pinned notices for work and lost horses and items for sale, and the occasional declaration of grievance that the editor of the local paper refused to print. It was cold enough that morning that her breath made small clouds in front of her face, and she had been standing there long enough that her feet were going numb in her boots, which were not bad boots but were not made for standing still in October air. She read it again from memory without taking it out of her pocket. Cook and housekeeper needed. Caldwell Ranch. Inquire at the main gate. Fair wages. Room and board. Fair wages. She almost laughed. She had $6.40 in her purse, which she knew without counting because she had counted it that morning. In the boarding house room she had paid for through Friday, and not past Friday, because Friday was the end of what she could afford. She had 3 dresses, 2 of which were practical, and 1 of which she kept because Vivian had helped her mend it once, and she was not ready to give that up. She had a carpet bag that was not full, and a reputation in town, such as it was, that mostly consisted of people knowing her name and not much else because she had only been in Redstone Valley for 5 weeks. She had come to Redstone Valley because she had run out of places to go and had heard there was work, which was partly true in the way that a lot of things you hear are partly true. There was work, in the sense that there were things that needed doing. Whether anyone was going to pay a woman they didn't know from a hole in the ground to do those things was a different matter entirely. She was 31 years old, and she had been taking care of herself since she was 19, and she was good at it, mostly, with some notable exceptions. She could cook. She was not precious about it. She was not a woman who required compliments or appreciation or particular ingredients. But she could take what was in front of her and make something out of it that people were glad they'd eaten. And she had always been quietly proud of that in the practical way that you're proud of things you can actually rely on. The Caldwell Ranch. She had heard the name. Everybody in Redstone Valley had heard the name. Richest rancher in the territory, they said. Lost his wife a few years back and hasn't been the same since. 2 children, big place, keeps to himself. Eliza had a specific feeling in her chest when she heard about Ethan Caldwell, a feeling she had not told anyone about because it was not the kind of thing you could explain to a stranger without sounding like you'd invented it. Because she had known Vivian Caldwell. Not known her the way neighbors know each other, not known her the way colleagues do. She had known Vivian the way you know someone when you have both ended up in the same difficult place at the same difficult time, and you make a kind of friendship that doesn't have a good name but is real all the same. It had been years ago. Vivian had not been Vivian Caldwell yet, had still been Vivian Harper, and they had both been working at a boarding house outside of Laramie that was not a particularly pleasant place to be, but was better than the alternatives available at the time. They had shared a room for 7 months, and in that time, Vivian had told Eliza things about where she came from, about what she wanted, about the man she had met who was rough around the edges, but decent underneath and was going to build something real in the valley. She had told Eliza about her mother's apple cake. She had described it in such specific detail. The particular ratio of cinnamon to nutmeg, the way the apples needed to be cut thin enough that they melted into the batter, the small amount of molasses that no one ever guessed was in there, but that made the whole thing taste like it had been made by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. That Eliza had written it down on the inside cover of a prayer book she no longer had, but had not needed to, because she had made the cake herself, and it had gone straight into her hands like something her hands already knew. Vivian had written to her twice after leaving Laramie. The second letter mentioned Redstone Valley, and a ranch, and a man named Ethan, and a feeling that she had found where she was supposed to be. After that, no more letters, and Eliza had eventually understood from a woman she met in passing that Vivian had passed on a few winters back. She had grieved that privately, the way you grieve for someone you don't have public permission to grieve. And now here was a notice on a board in Redstone Valley, and $6.40 in her purse, and boots that were going to keep getting colder until she moved. She moved. The road to the Caldwell Ranch was 3 miles from town, which she walked because the stage didn't run that direction on weekdays, and she was not going to spend money on a hired horse when she had 2 working legs and a coat. It took her a little over an hour, and it was not a pleasant walk in the cold, but she had done worse things in worse conditions, and she kept her mind on the task, which was to arrive looking like someone who had a plan. She had a plan. It was, get the job. The gate was hanging slightly wrong on one of its hinges, she noticed as she came up to it, and there was a fresh scrape on the post where something had hit it hard. She filed that away as information and knocked on the post instead of the gate, because the gate looked like it needed to rest. A man appeared from the direction of the nearest outbuilding. Not the rancher, she could tell from the way he moved, purposeful but not proprietary. He was the foreman type. He looked at her with the particular look that men in that position gave to women who showed up unannounced on working ranches. "Help you?" he said. "I'm here about the housekeeper position," she said. "I saw the notice in town this morning." He studied her for a moment. "That notice went up this morning." "Yes," she said. "I know." Something in the way she said it made him almost smile. He opened the gate, carefully, she noticed, because he knew about the hinge, and said, "I'll get Ethan." He said the name the way people say the name of someone they respect but worry about. She stored that away too. She waited in the yard, which was large and well kept in the functional sense. There were no flowers, no decorative anything, just the practical evidence of a working operation. The fence line straight, the outbuilding solid, the water trough clean, the ground raked clear of debris. It was the yard of someone who cared deeply about what worked and had stopped caring, at some point, about what looked nice. Ethan Caldwell came out of the main house, and she watched him walk toward her and made her assessments without being obvious about it. He was tall, which she had expected from the general category of rancher. He was broader than she'd imagined, with the particular build of someone who worked alongside his men rather than merely directing them. His face was weathered in the honest way of outdoor work, not rough exactly, but with the grain of a man who had spent years in the elements. His eyes were the kind of dark brown that could look either warm or closed, depending on what was happening behind them, and right now they were closed. He looked at her the way he probably looked at a fence section he was trying to figure out, assessing, not unkind but direct. "Eliza Vane, he said, because the foreman must have relayed the name. "Yes," she said. "You have experience cooking for a large household?" "Yes," she said. "I've cooked for up to 20 at one sitting. Your operation is 11 hands, I'm told, plus yourself and 2 children. I can manage that." He paused, just for a beat. "Who told you how many hands I have?" "The man who let me through the gate, and word around town is roughly consistent with that number." His expression didn't change much, but something behind it did. You talk to a lot of people in town? I listen, she said. It's different. He looked at her for another moment. She did not fill the silence, which she had learned was the correct choice when someone was deciding something about you. References? He said. She had two, written on paper, which she handed over. He read them both, folded them, handed them back. It's a live-in position, he said, room off the back porch. Private, with its own door. Meals for the family and for the hands midday meal. Kitchen clean, house clean, general order. He paused. My children are 12 and 15. My daughter will likely follow you everywhere. My son will likely avoid you. Neither of them are problems you need to solve. Something about the precision of that struck her. He knew his children. He had observed them carefully enough to describe them in those terms, and the way he said it was not a warning exactly, but more like someone laying out the honest shape of a thing before you agreed to carry it. That's fine, she said. Room and board plus $12 a month, he said. I'll give it a 30-day trial. If it's not working for either side, we part without quarrel. That's fair, she said. When can you start? Now, she said. If you have an apron. He did not have an apron. Mrs. Pruitt had taken hers, which was either reasonable or passive-aggressive, depending on your interpretation. And the kitchen had the faintly abandoned look of a room whose person had recently left it. The surfaces were clean, but there was nothing on them, nothing in progress, no herbs hanging, no dough rising, no indication that anyone had recently treated this space as something that mattered. Eliza set her bag inside the door of the back room, which was small but private, and had a window that faced east, which meant morning light, which she counted as a genuine luxury. And then she put on the one clean apron she found folded at the back of a drawer, and she stood in the middle of the kitchen and she looked at it. Old stove, well-maintained, good cast iron, deep sink with a decent pump. The cold storage was adequate. The dry goods were low but not desperate. Someone had kept it all functional, had just not loved it. She did not love it immediately either, because she was a practical woman and she did not perform emotions she wasn't feeling. But she saw the possibility of it, and that was enough to work with. Lunch was simple: beef stew from what was in the cold storage, biscuits from the pantry flour, which she nearly despaired over because it was old and had settled. But she worked it back and the biscuits came out acceptable. Not her best work, but honest. She rang the lunch bell at noon exactly, because Deke had told her noon was when they expected it, and the hands came in from the yard and the field in ones and twos and ate without saying much to her, which was also fine. That would change. It always changed. Lily Caldwell appeared in the kitchen doorway at 12:30. She was 12, which Eliza had known, but she looked simultaneously younger and older than 12 in the way that children do when they have lost a parent early. Younger, because something in them is still reaching for what should have been there. Older, because they have had to carry things they shouldn't have had to carry yet. She had her father's coloring, dark hair and dark eyes, but her face was rounder, softer, still in the process of becoming whatever it would eventually be. She stood in the doorway and looked at Eliza and said nothing. Eliza looked back at her without making a performance of it. The stew's still warm if you're hungry, she said. I'd sit before it gets cold. Lily sat down at the kitchen table instead of the dining room, which was probably telling. She ate with the particular focus of someone who was hungry and either didn't know it or wasn't going to admit it. She finished half a bowl and then looked up. Mrs. Pruitt used to make soup, she said. Not stew, soup. What's the difference? Eliza asked, genuinely curious. Lily thought about it. Soup is thinner, and it had noodles. I can make soup with noodles, Eliza said. Tomorrow, if you want. Lily studied her with the particular scrutiny of a 12-year-old trying to figure out if an adult can be trusted. Dad says you're here for 30 days, she said. That's the arrangement, Eliza said. Mrs. Pruitt was supposed to be here for longer, Lily said. She left anyway. Eliza put down the pot she was scrubbing. She looked at Lily directly. I'm not Mrs. Pruitt, she said. I don't have a sister in Colorado. Lily looked at her for a moment. Something in the tension around her eyes loosened, just slightly. The biscuits were good, she said. Not as good as my mother's, but good. I know, Eliza said. I'll get better once I know the oven. Lily picked up her bowl and carried it to the sink herself, which Eliza noted and did not comment on. Then she left. Nathan Caldwell came into the kitchen once, briefly, at 2 in the afternoon, and the look he gave Eliza was not hostile exactly, but was testing, the kind of look a person gives when they are deciding whether to care about something and hoping not to. He was 15, and he was built like his father was going to be built, broad through the shoulders already, with his mother's mouth, which Eliza recognized from the one small portrait she had glimpsed in the hallway. He had the particular posture of a boy who had decided that showing he was affected by things was a vulnerability he could not afford. He took an apple from the bowl on the counter and did not say anything. "There's stew left," Eliza said. "I know," he said. He left. That was the whole conversation. She did not take it personally because she was not in the habit of taking such things personally. She had been new before. She had been the person who needed to be proved, and she understood the logic of it, even when it was delivered through silence and apples. Ethan came through the kitchen at 4, not for food, just moving through the house toward whatever task was next. The way men who live in their own spaces move without thinking about who might be in them. He stopped when he saw the difference, the pots in a different order, the window cracked open an inch for the smell of the burned onions she had not entirely managed to avoid, the small bunch of dried sage she had found in the very back of the pantry and hung near the window because it needed air. He looked at the sage. "Mrs. Pruitt didn't use that," he said. "Where did it come from?" she asked. He looked at it for another moment. "My wife grew herbs," he said. "We still have some dried." "I'll use what's useful," she said carefully. "Let me know if anything is off limits." He looked at her with those closed, dark eyes. "Nothing's off limits," he said flatly, the way you say a thing when you mean the opposite but are too tired to have the argument. She let it go. He moved on through the kitchen and out the back door, and she turned back to the stove, and she thought about Vivian, who had once told her that Ethan was a man who kept everything locked in the same box and had lost the key on purpose, and who had believed she could help him find it eventually, and who had not had enough time. She thought about that for only a moment, because she was not here for Vivian's reasons. She was here for $6.40 that had become room and board, and $12 a month and a window that faced east. And she was here because she had run out of other places to go, and because sometimes running out of places leads you to the one place that turns out to matter. She thought about that too, briefly, and then she stopped thinking and concentrated on the stove. By the end of the first week, she had mapped the house. Not in the physical sense, she had that down in 2 days, but in the living sense, where the cold drafts came in, which stair creaked, where Nathan disappeared to in the late afternoon, the barn, second stall from the end, where there was a post he'd been carving something into, where Lily went when she was sad, the window seat in the upstairs hall, which faced south and got late afternoon light, where Ethan sat when the house was quiet, the chair in the front room that faced the door, not the most comfortable chair, not the warmest, but the one where he could see the entrance, like a man who needed to know what was coming. She knew the house's rhythms within a week, and she adjusted to them without making a performance of it, because she had always believed that coming into someone's established life required a kind of quiet care, a period of listening before speaking. You did not arrive and announce yourself. You arrived and you paid attention. The hands warmed to her food by day 3, which was when she made the beef and potato pie with the gravy that came out almost right. Not perfect. She had been working with unfamiliar flour and a slightly too hot oven, and she knew it. But enough. Corbin, the young one, said it was the best thing he'd eaten since his mother's kitchen, and then looked embarrassed about having said that, and she pretended not to have heard it, which was a kindness. Deke ate 2 helpings and said nothing, which she had already figured out was his version of a compliment. Even Nathan, who was committed to the project of not being moved by anything, ate 3 biscuits at supper on Thursday and did not leave the table immediately after, which she counted as progress. Lily had taken to sitting in the kitchen while Eliza worked. She didn't always talk. Sometimes she just sat with a book open on the table that she wasn't reading, and Eliza moved around her and didn't push, and gradually words came out sideways the way they do with children when you give them enough quiet. "My mother used to sing in here," Lily said on Thursday evening, not looking up from the book. "I don't remember the song, but I remember the sound of it." Eliza was cutting the next morning's bread dough into portions. "That kind of thing stays," she said. "The sound of a person, even when the words go." Lily was quiet for a moment. Do you think she'd be mad that someone else is in her kitchen? Eliza thought about that carefully before she answered, because Lily deserved a careful answer and not a comfortable one. I think she'd want this kitchen to smell like food again, she said. I think a woman who cooked in here loved this room and would be glad it wasn't empty. Lily looked up from the book. Her eyes were wet at the edges, but she was not going to cry. She was going to decide not to cry, and Eliza respected that. How do you know what she was like? Lily asked. And there it was. The question she had been waiting for and dreading and rehearsing answers to in the back of her mind since she had walked through the gate. She answered it with a partial truth, because partial truth was sometimes the only kind that was kind. I don't, she said. I'm guessing. From the kitchen. And from you. Lily looked at her for a moment. From me? People who grew up love tend to show it, Eliza said. And how they are. You show it. Lily went back to the book. But she stayed in the kitchen another hour, and when she finally went upstairs, she said goodnight, which she had not done on the first 2 evenings. It was a small thing, but Eliza had always known that small things were the ones that added up. It was the second Saturday of her time at the ranch when she found the basket. She had been working her way through the storage cellar, cataloging what was there, because she needed to know what she had to work with through winter, and in the back corner under a shelf of salt and dried beans, there was a basket covered with a piece of rough canvas that had not been touched in long enough that there was dust on the canvas, and a mouse had tried to nest in the corner of it before abandoning the project. She lifted the canvas. Apples. October apples, the old orchard variety, small and dense, and a particular shade of deep red that meant they would be tart but complex, the kind you did not eat out of hand without preparation, but that became extraordinary with heat and sugar and the right hands. Vivian's orchard apples. She stood there in the cellar for a moment in the cold, with the basket of apples in her hands, and something moved through her that was not quite grief and not quite recognition, but was something between the two that did not have a clean name. She knew what to do with these apples. She had always known. She took the basket upstairs. The cake came together from memory, not just the recipe, but the sense memory of watching Vivian describe it with her hands moving in the air, the way she did when she talked about things she loved, counting off the ingredients on her fingers, saying the amounts with the confidence of someone who had made something so many times it had become part of them. The cinnamon and nutmeg in the particular ratio. The apples cut thin. The small dark measure of molasses that looked wrong in the bowl but was right in the cake, that made it taste like autumn itself had been concentrated and made into something you could eat. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear him come in. She only knew Ethan was in the kitchen when she heard him stop. Not pause. Stop. The complete cessation of movement that happens when something reaches through all the noise of a life and grabs you by the sternum. She turned around. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, and his face had gone through some change that left it looking younger and more broken at the same time. And he was staring at the cake on the counter as if it were something he did not have any idea what to do with. "Where did you get that recipe?" he said. His voice was completely level, which was, she understood immediately, a sign of how far from level he actually was. The kitchen smelled like October and warmth and something she did not have words for. She felt the weight of the next moment before she spoke. "Ethan," she said, and then she stopped, because she had not meant to use his first name, and also because she needed a breath before she said the rest of it. "I knew your wife. Before she came here. Before she was your wife." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had heard in years. He did not move from the doorway. He looked at the cake, and then at her, and then at the cake again. And she watched him do the thing that men who keep everything in the same locked box do when something gets through the lock anyway. She watched him try to close it back up and not quite manage it. "Vivian," he said, "just the name." "Yes," she said. His jaw moved. He looked at the window over the sink, then back at her, then at nothing in particular. "She never told me," he said finally. "We were in Laramie for a time," Eliza said carefully, "before she came west. She talked about you. She talked about what you were building. She talked about this valley." She paused. "She told me about this cake." He put his hat on the counter. He had not decided to. It just happened, the hat landing as if his hand had let it go without his knowledge. "Every detail," he said. He was not asking. "Every detail," she said. He stood there in the kitchen that smelled like his wife's cake, in the house that had stopped feeling like home years ago, and Eliza watched him fight something she could not name and was not going to name for him, because some things a person has to find words for themselves, and the finding is the thing that matters. She turned back to the stove. She adjusted the heat. She let the silence be what it was. And behind her, after a long time, she heard Ethan Caldwell pull out a chair and sit down at the kitchen table for the first time in years. That was not about eating or obligation or keeping up appearances, but simply because he did not have anywhere else to be, and for the first time in a very long time, that was all right. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Eliza did not fill the silence with talk. She had learned early in her life that silence was not always something that needed to be fixed, and the particular silence that had settled over Ethan Caldwell as he sat with his hands flat on the table and the smell of his dead wife's cake moving through the air around him was not a silence that wanted company. It was the silence of a man who had been walking around a closed door for years and had just found it open and was standing in the frame not sure whether to go through or pull it shut again. She moved around the kitchen and gave him room and did not look at him more than she had to. The cake needed another 20 minutes. She knew by the smell. There was a point when the cinnamon moved from sharp to round, when the apples gave up their last resistance and became something unified with the batter, and they weren't there yet. She had time. She reorganized the shelf of tin cups that had been in the wrong order since she arrived, because Mrs. Pruitt had been a woman of mysterious organizational logic, and she wiped down the counter by the window, and she was aware of him the whole time, with that particular awareness you have of another person when the air between you has changed. She was in Laramie, he said finally. Not a question, just placing it somewhere. She was working at a boarding house, Eliza said. So was I. We shared a room for about 7 months, she paused. This was a couple years before she came to the valley. He was quiet for a moment. She never talked about that time. People don't always talk about the in-between years, Eliza said. He turned the brim of his hat in his hands, which was sitting on the table beside him. It was a habit she had already noticed. He picked things up and worked them when he was thinking. Fence wire, a strap of leather, now the hat. His hands needed to be doing something even when the rest of him was still. What did she say about me? He asked, and the way he said it was careful, like a man asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Eliza considered. She could give him the easy version, the one that would feel like a gift, or she could give him the true version, which was also a gift but took longer to feel like one. She said you were stubborn as a creek in January, she said, and that you had a laugh she'd only heard twice, but that it was worth waiting for. She looked at him directly. She said she'd never met anyone who worked as hard at something as you worked at the ranch. She said she didn't know yet if that was the thing she loved most about you or the thing that was going to be hardest. He put the hat down on the table. He looked at his hands. She was right on both counts, he said. Turns out. The oven shifted with a low sound, the way old metal does when the heat moves through it, and the kitchen held the warmth and the smell of apples and spice, and Ethan Caldwell sat at the table with his dead wife between them like a third presence, not threatening, not painful exactly, just there, the way the most significant things in a life are always there, whether or not you look at them. She talked about you too, he said eventually. Eliza looked up from the counter. After she came here, he said, now and then. She mentioned a woman from Laramie. Didn't say a name, said she was the most practical person she'd ever met, and that she'd learned more from her in 7 months than from most people in years. He was looking at the table when he said it, not at her. I didn't put it together. There was no reason to. No, she said. There wasn't. She would have... He stopped. He tried again. She would have found it funny, probably, that you ended up here. Probably, Eliza said. He almost smiled. It didn't quite finish, but it started, and she could see the shape of it at the corner of his mouth, the way a laugh sits in the face of someone who hasn't used it in a while. Then he picked up his hat, stood up from the table, and walked to the kitchen door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Thank you, he said, for telling me. She nodded. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands still and the cake in the oven and the long rectangle of late afternoon light coming through the window. And she breathed in the smell of it, and she thought, Vivian, you would not believe where I ended up. The cake came out right. She knew before she cut into it that it had come out right, the way you know when something has done what it was supposed to do. There was a particular give when she pressed the center, a particular shade of brown on the surface. The steam that came off the cut edge carrying that specific combination of spice and sweetness, and the faint dark note of the molasses underneath everything else. She set it on the counter, and she looked at it for a moment, and she felt the full weight of what she had made, which was not just a cake. She covered it with a cloth and left it for supper. At supper that evening, she brought it to the table after the meal, which she had not announced because she was not sure how to announce it, and in the end had decided not to. She set it in the middle of the table, and she cut it into slices, and she put the plates out, and she stepped back to the kitchen doorway. Lily looked at it, and something happened to her face. A recognition. Not from memory. She would have been too small to carry the memory clearly, but from something deeper than memory, the place in the body that holds things the mind has let go. That's, she said and stopped. Nathan looked at his sister, then at the cake. His jaw shifted. Ethan looked at neither of them. He looked at his slice on the plate. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Lily picked up her fork and took a bite, and her eyes went wet, and she did not cry. She looked at the ceiling and she breathed, and when she looked back down, her voice was ordinary, perfectly ordinary, controlled the way Caldwell's apparently controlled things. "It's the same," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. Nathan took a bite. He chewed and he swallowed and he put his fork down and he got up from the table and walked out of the dining room, and nobody stopped him because there was nothing to say. They could hear him on the stairs, going up to his room, and then nothing. Eliza started to clear the table, and Lily said, without looking at her, "He's not mad. He just doesn't know where to put it." "I know," Eliza said. "He doesn't cry," Lily said. "He hasn't since the funeral. He thinks if he starts, he won't stop." "He'll stop," Eliza said. "He just needs to know that before he's willing to start." Lily looked at her. "Did you cry when someone you loved died?" Eliza set down the plates she was holding. "Yes," she said. "I did." "Did you stop?" "Yes." Lily nodded, slowly, as if filing that away. Then she ate the rest of her cake. The town got hold of it by the following week. Eliza had known it was coming. Small towns in the frontier were not places where information stayed private for long, and the information in question, that the new Caldwell housekeeper had known Vivian Harper before she came west, had cooked her recipe, had sat at the table with Ethan Caldwell himself, was exactly the kind of thing that moved fast and changed shape in the moving. She first heard it in the general store on the Wednesday when she went into town for supplies, from a woman named Cecily Marsh, who ran the fabric section, and who smiled at Eliza with a warmth that was not warmth at all, but was the social gesture that precedes information being transferred with maximum efficiency. "You knew Vivian Caldwell," Cecily said, not a question, reaching past her for a spool of thread she did not appear to need. "I knew her before she came to the valley," Eliza said. "Years ago." "How interesting," Cecily said, and her tone made the word mean something else entirely. Eliza bought her flour and her dried beans and her baking powder, and she left without elaborating, because elaborating to Cecily Marsh was like feeding a machine. Whatever you put in came out transformed into something you hadn't intended and couldn't control. She was on her way back through the main street when she passed two women in conversation outside the post office, both of whom stopped talking when they saw her and then resumed talking clearly with their voices lowered, which was worse than silence because it was less subtle than the people doing it believed. She did not stop. She kept her head level and her pace steady, the way she had learned to keep moving through things that wanted to slow you down. And she went back to the ranch and she put the supplies away and she started the evening meal, and she did not say anything to anyone about what had happened in town, because it was not yet her problem to solve, and she was not a woman who borrowed trouble before it arrived. It arrived 3 days later. A man came to the ranch gate on a Saturday morning with the specific air of someone who had been sent rather than someone who had come on his own authority. He was middle-aged, soft-handed, wearing a coat that cost more than his manner deserved, and he asked for Ethan Caldwell and was shown to the front room, and Eliza only knew about any of it because she was in the hall with a basket of linens when the voices from the front room carried. She did not intend to listen. She moved past the door, which was partly open, and then she heard Harlan Voss's name, and she stopped. She stood in the hall with the linen basket, and she listened. The man, she did not know his name, was speaking in the careful tone of someone delivering a message they have been told is important, while understanding they are in a room with someone who might throw them out of it. Mr. Voss wanted you to understand, the man said, that his concerns are not personal. He has nothing against you, Ethan, personally. He pushed my gate off its hinge and told me my cattle could die thirsty, Ethan said. His voice was flat in the way of someone who is being very deliberate about staying flat. Tell me what he wants. A pause. Papers shuffling. He's prepared to withdraw the water rights claim entirely, the man said, and to drop the matter with the county commissioner, in exchange for a one-time payment of $15,000 and a written agreement that the Caldwell operation will not expand east of the Harmon Creek line for a period of 20 years. Silence. $15,000. Eliza did not know the precise state of the Caldwell finances, but she knew what a number like that felt like in a conversation. The weight of it, the way it sat in the air. She knew the east range of the Caldwell property was the growth direction. She had heard Deke mention it once while talking to one of the other hands. Blocking east expansion for 20 years was not just a restriction, it was a ceiling. No, Ethan said. Mr. Voss anticipated that response. He asked me to make clear that without agreement, the water rights litigation will proceed through winter, and the injunctions filed with the county could delay resolution until spring. He understands that creates difficulties for a livestock operation. Get out, Ethan said. A longer pause. Ethan, I said get out. The sound of a chair and then footsteps in the front door, and Eliza moved quickly back toward the kitchen with the linen basket, and she was around the corner before Ethan came into the hall. She heard him stand there for a moment. Then he went in the other direction, toward the back of the house, and then the sound of the back door, and then nothing. She put the linen basket down on the kitchen table and stood with her hands flat on the surface of it, and she thought about Harlan Voss, who she had not met and did not need to meet to understand, because she had met his kind before. Men who dressed their predation in the language of business and pretended that was civilization. And she thought about Ethan, who was out behind the house somewhere right now holding on to his temper with both hands, and who had said no to $15,000 and a ceiling on his future because he was not a man who negotiated with people who pushed his gate off its hinge and threatened his cattle. And she thought, that is either the bravest thing or the most stubborn thing, and with a man like that, it is probably both. She started on the lunch. Nathan found her in the vegetable garden that afternoon. She had been in the garden more than she might have been otherwise because the garden was in a state that she found difficult to ignore, which was the state of something once deliberately planted and maintained and then gradually let go, the way things go when the person who loved them stops being there. The structure was still visible, the beds were in good positions, the old plant markers still in the ground in some places. But the beds themselves were overgrown, and the markers were weathered past reading, and the soil was compacted and needed to be broken. She was working the soil in the bed closest to the kitchen door, breaking up the hard surface with a hand tool, when she became aware of Nathan standing at the edge of the garden, watching her with the slightly hunted look he wore when he wanted something, but had not decided whether to want it out loud. She kept working. She had found that direct attention sometimes scared off whatever Nathan was working up to, the way sudden movement scares a bird. After a while, he sat down on the low stone wall that bordered the garden. He picked up a stone and turned it over. "What are you planting?" he said, which was clearly not what he had come to say. "Nothing yet," she said. "Getting it ready for spring." "It's October." "Spring comes after winter," she said. "You have to start before you need it." He turned the stone over again. She could feel him working up to something. "People in town are saying things," he said. "People in town say things," she said, and kept working the soil. "About you, about why you're here." She stopped then and looked at him directly, because Nathan was a boy who paid close attention to whether adults gave him straight answers or managed him, and he had a sharp sense for the difference. "What are they saying?" He met her eyes, which cost him something. "That you knew our mother, and that you're using it, to get a position here, to—" He stopped. "They're saying different things. Some of them are saying you want to take her place." The air between them was very still. "What do you think?" she said. He looked at the stone in his hand. "I think if you wanted to be sneaky about it, you'd have hidden that you knew her," he said. Telling Dad seemed like the opposite of sneaky. She felt something ease in her chest. "It was the opposite of sneaky," she said. Telling him was not comfortable. "Was he angry?" "He was—" She thought about how to say it accurately. not sure what to do with it, which is different from angry. Nathan put the stone down. He looked at the overturned soil. She grew tomatoes here, he said, and some kind of herb, mint maybe. It keeps coming back in the corner over there even though nobody tends it. Eliza looked where he pointed. There it was, determined and ragged, growing back because that is what mint does. Good, she said. I'll work around it. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to fix it, he said, and his voice had shifted, lower and more honest than she had heard it. The garden. You don't have to fix all of it. She understood what he meant, and it was not about the garden. I know, she said. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm trying to help things that are still alive keep growing. She looked at the mint. That's different. Nathan stood up from the wall. He dusted his palms on his trousers. He looked at her with something that was not yet trust, but was in the neighborhood of it, the beginning of the direction of it. She would have liked you, he said. Probably. The probably was important. The probably was how Nathan Caldwell gave a compliment without fully giving one, which was very much his father's method. Probably, she agreed. He left, hands in his pockets, heading back toward the barn. She watched him go, and then she turned back to the soil and she worked until the light changed. The gossip in town did not stay manageable. This was the thing about small frontier communities. They were held together by proximity and shared hardship and an intimate knowledge of each other's business, which was both their strength and their toxicity. Eliza had known towns like Redstone Valley before, and she had known that a woman alone, new, without clear history, working inside a wealthy widower's home, was going to attract a particular quality of attention. She had accepted that as part of the arrangement. What she had not calculated was Harlan Voss. She learned about it through Deke, who told her on a Tuesday in the second week with the matter-of-fact delivery of a man who believed in telling people what they needed to know, and thought. Softening the delivery was a form of disrespect. Voss has been talking, Deke said. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she had given him, which he held in both hands the way someone holds something warm when they have something cold to say. To people around town, to the women in particular, he's been suggesting that your connection to Vivian was convenient, that you knew what the ranch was worth and came deliberately. Eliza was at the stove. She did not stop what she was doing. What exactly is he suggesting? Deke was quiet for a moment. That you knew Vivian just well enough to know details, personal ones, that you're using those details to position yourself. She turned down the heat on the pot. She turned around and looked at Deke. He's suggesting I calculated this. He's suggesting it in the particular way that doesn't say it outright, so it can't be answered outright, Deke said, which is how Voss operates. He doesn't make accusations. He makes suggestions and lets other people finish them. She thought about that for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the October sky was pressing down gray and cold, the kind of day that felt like the weather was making a point. Why? She said. What does he gain from my reputation? Deke wrapped both hands tighter around the cup. Ethan rejected his offer last week, on the water rights in the East Range. Voss doesn't like losing. He's looking for a way to destabilize. If the ranch is distracted, if Ethan is dealing with social pressure or, he paused, Voss knows people. He knows that a grieving man's vulnerability is the thing that grieving men protect the hardest. She understood then. Completely and clearly, the way you understand a piece of machinery once you see what the moving parts are connected to. Harlan Voss was not after her. He was after Ethan. And the way to reach Ethan was through the things Ethan guarded most, his children, his late wife's memory, his pride. She was not the target. She was the instrument. Does Ethan know? She said. He knows Voss is spreading something, Deke said. I told him yesterday. He didn't say much. He looked at her steadily. He's not a man who shows what he thinks until he's finished thinking it. I know, she said, which surprised Deke slightly. She could see it in his face. She turned back to the stove. I'm not going to defend myself in town, she said. I'm not going to address the rumors directly. That's not how these things work. If you start defending yourself from whispers, you look like you have something to defend, and the whispers get louder. Deke nodded slowly. That's my read too. What I'm going to do, she said, is keep doing what I came here to do, which is cook and clean and keep this house in order. "That's not nothing," Deke said. "No," she said. "It isn't." He finished his coffee and set the cup on the table and stood up. He looked at her for a moment with the long look of a man who had been watching people for a long time and had gotten fairly good at reading them. "Vivian was a good woman," he said. "I'll just say that. I worked this ranch when she was here. She was a good woman, and she made this a better place, and losing her did something to Ethan that I'm not sure I can describe." He put his hat on. "I've watched this ranch since she died, and I've watched what's happened to it. And since you've been here, whatever else is going on in town, this place is different. The kitchen smells like something. The kids are talking at supper. Ethan sat out on the front step last night for 20 minutes after the day was done, and I don't think he's done that since before she died." He went to the door. "I just wanted you to know somebody noticed." He left before she could respond, which was probably intentional, and she stood in the kitchen with the pot on the low heat and the gray window and the complicated feeling of being seen by someone who hadn't needed anything from her in order to see her clearly. The week that followed was the week Eliza understood what it actually meant to be inside a powerful man's orbit when that power was under threat. Two of the hands, men who had been civil without being warm since she arrived, began eating their midday meals outside even in the cold, which was their way of making a statement without having to make it directly. She noted it without reacting. A woman who came to collect Lily for her Tuesday afternoon reading lesson arrived at the front door, took in Eliza with a long assessing look, and when Eliza offered her coffee, she said no thank you in a way that meant more than no thank you. The storekeeper in town added a small delay to filling her order that had not been there before, a delay so minor it could not be called deliberate, and yet was clearly deliberate. None of it was large. All of it was real. She kept the kitchen warm and the food good and the house clean. She helped Lily with a geography assignment that stumped her by making a game of it, placing dried beans on the kitchen table to stand in for cities and rivers. And Lily laughed for the first time in a way that didn't stop at the edge of her mouth, but went all the way through her. She left a pot of stew in the bunkhouse on the coldest night of October without comment, and the two hands who had been eating outside came back inside the next day without comment either, which was how the thing was resolved. Ethan came into the kitchen most evenings now. Not for long and not with much to say, but he came. He would sit at the table with something to read or something to review, papers from the lawyer in the Capitol, about the water rights mostly, which he spread on the table and studied with the particular intensity of a man who was determined to understand something completely before trusting anyone else to explain it to him. Sometimes he asked her questions that she realized were about things other than what he was asking. He asked once what she thought fair dealing looked like, and she understood he was asking about Voss, and she gave him an honest answer. He didn't respond immediately, just nodded, but she could see him putting it somewhere. He was a man, she understood more clearly every week, who processed things slowly and thoroughly and stored conclusions like resources for a hard winter. He did not act fast or speak carelessly. He was not impulsive in any direction, not toward anger and not toward warmth. But things landed on him and stayed, and she could see the way the things she said stayed on him and became part of whatever he was building in the private workshop of his mind. She was careful. She was careful every day, because Vivian had loved this man, and that mattered to her in a way that had nothing to do with the $12 a month or the room with the east window. Because Lily was 12 and needed something steady. Because Nathan was 15 and had a laugh she had heard exactly once, when Corbin, the young hand, fell backward off a water barrel, trying to reach the top shelf of the tack room. And it was his father's laugh, she realized when she heard it, the one Vivian had described as worth waiting for. Because she had walked through that gate 3 weeks ago with $6.40 and nowhere else to go. And somewhere in the days since, this difficult and complicated and half-broken place had started to feel like the first place in years that had the quality of somewhere real. She was careful about that most of all. It was a Friday when it broke open, which was appropriate because it had been a Friday that Harlan Voss had given as his deadline, and nothing about Harlan Voss happened on the schedule anyone else set for it. Ethan had ridden out early to check the east fence line with Deke, a regular inspection he did himself rather than delegating because he was the kind of man who believed in first-hand knowledge. The children were in town for the day, Lily at her reading lesson, Nathan at the feed store helping with a delivery that Deke had arranged as a practical education in commerce. The ranch was quieter than usual, the hands working their various sections, and Eliza had the kitchen to herself for the morning. She was making bread because there was something about bread that settled her thinking, the physical work of it, the fact that it was either right or wrong in the end, and you knew which. She was working the dough on the floured counter when she heard a horse at the gate, and then boots on the porch steps, and she assumed it was one of the hands coming back early, and she did not look up when the knock came at the back door. She opened it. Harlan Voss was not what she had pictured, which was the first surprise. She had pictured someone coarser, someone whose menace was visible. What she got was a man in his mid-40s who was almost handsome in a weathered way, with well-maintained clothes and an easy manner that was clearly practiced, the manner of a man who had found that being charming was more efficient than being frightening most of the time. He smiled at her with his eyes doing nothing. "Miss Vane," he said, "I've been meaning to introduce myself, Harlan Voss." She stood in the kitchen doorway with her hands floury and her apron on, and she looked at him with the exact level of expression she chose to show, which was none. "Ethan's not here," she said. "I know," he said. "I came to talk to you." The air was cold around him and warm behind her, and the bread dough needed another 4 minutes of working, and she understood with complete clarity that this was not a social call. "I'm busy," she said. "I won't take long." The smile stayed, unaffected by her lack of response to it. "I just wanted to be neighborly. You're new to the valley, and sometimes newcomers don't get a full picture of the situation they've walked into." "I have a full picture," she said. "Do you?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because from where I stand, you've walked into a complicated position. A man still grieving, a household that's had trouble holding help, a community that has a long memory." He paused. "People are worried about you, Miss Vane, about your situation. A woman alone in a place like this can find things become uncomfortable." She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you threatening me?" she said. He put a hand to his chest, an expression of mild offense crossing his face. "I'm expressing concern." "You're expressing a threat," she said, in the language of concern. "There's a difference, and we both know it." She put her hand on the doorframe. "You came here because Ethan said no to you and you're looking for another way in. I'm not a way in. I'm a cook." She looked at him steadily. "The bread needs finishing. Good day, Mr. Voss." She shut the door. She stood inside with her back against it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to feel her heart doing what it was doing, fast and hard, and not quite steady. And then she went back to the counter, and she worked the dough, and she breathed through her nose, and she felt, under the fear that she was not going to name as fear, but that was absolutely fear, the particular sensation of a line that has been crossed, a thing that has been said out loud that cannot be said back into silence. She had just made an enemy of Harlan Voss. She was not sure, in the arithmetic of the situation, that she had any choice. She finished the bread. It came out well. She covered it and set it to cool, and she went back to her work, because what she had told him was true. She was a cook, and her bread was good. And this kitchen was in her care, and those things were true regardless of what Harlan Voss decided to do next. But she thought, while she moved through the rest of that morning, that she was going to need to tell Ethan what had happened, and she thought about how to do that. And she thought about the particular difficulty of telling a man like Ethan Caldwell that someone had come to his house in his absence to threaten the woman he had hired, because a man like Ethan Caldwell was going to feel that not as information, but as fire. And what he did with fire was not always the thing that served him best. She thought about it all morning. Ethan came back at noon, and she served the lunch, and she waited until Lily and Nathan had gone back to their afternoon business, and Deke had gone out to the yard before she set down the dish she was washing and turned to where Ethan was still at the table with the lawyer's papers. "Voss came this morning," she said. "He went very still. I wanted to talk to me," she said, "while you were gone. He wanted me to understand my situation in the valley, and he wanted me to understand that things could become uncomfortable for a woman alone." She said it plainly, without dramatics, the way you say something true that you want someone to hear accurately. "I told him I was busy, and I shut the door." Ethan put down the papers. She watched his face do something she had not seen it do before, something that started quiet and got quieter in the way that certain kinds of anger do. Not the explosive kind, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that compresses, that goes inward and becomes a cold and very specific resolve. He stood up from the table. "I'll handle it," he said. "How?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm asking seriously," she said. Because I want to know, and because what you do about it matters to how this goes. Not just for you and the water rights. For Lily and Nathan and the people in this valley who are watching how you respond. He stood there with that compressed thing in his face, and she could see him fighting it, the impulse toward action, the desire to saddle a horse and go find Harlan Voss and end the conversation in a language they both understood from 20 years of competition. He wants you reactive, she said. He wants you angry. Angry men make legal mistakes, and Voss is the kind of man who knows how to use a legal mistake. Ethan was quiet. Tell me what the lawyer says, she said. Tell me what you have. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down at the table and he picked up the papers and he told her. He spread the papers on the table between them the way a man lays out a map before a long journey. Not to show off the territory, but because he needed someone else to look at it with him, and he had been looking at it alone for long enough that the words had started to blur. The lawyer's name was Aldous Crane, out of the capital, a man Deke had wired 3 weeks ago, and who had responded with a 12-page letter written in the dense, careful language of someone who charged by the word and believed every word was worth it. Ethan had read it 4 times. He understood most of it. The parts he didn't understand were the parts that mattered most, which was the specific problem. Eliza pulled her chair around to his side of the table, which she had not done before. She had always kept the appropriate distance, the distance of someone in a professional arrangement, and she looked at the pages without waiting to be invited. The core of it was not complicated. Ethan's water rights claim predated Voss's by 11 years. The original filing was documented with the county, dated, witnessed, and recorded in 2 separate ledgers. The problem was that the county commissioner who had been in place when the filing was made had died 3 years ago, and his replacement, a man named Gerald Fitch, had ties to Voss that were not secret but were not official either, the kind of ties that are made of dinners and handshakes and debts that do not appear on paper. Fitch had, at Voss's prompting, raised a procedural objection to the original filing on the grounds that one of the 2 witness signatures was illegible, and therefore, under a statute that had been on the books for decades but rarely applied, potentially invalid. It was not a strong objection. Crane's letter was clear about that. In his professional opinion, the objection would not survive a proper legal challenge. But mounting a proper legal challenge required a circuit judge, and the nearest circuit judge sat in a town called Barton Creek, 2 days' ride east, and his schedule was backed up through winter, which meant the injunction Voss had filed could sit in place, unresolved, potentially past spring, which meant the water access that 200 head of cattle depended on was technically under dispute through the coldest and most vulnerable months of the year. Voss doesn't need to win, Eliza said, reading the last page again. He needs the clock. Yes, Ethan said. The cattle can still access the water during the dispute? For now. Fitch hasn't been able to formally restrict access yet because Crane filed a countermotion. But if Crane's countermotion fails on a technicality, and Crane gives that maybe a 30% chance, then Voss gets a temporary restriction order while the main case proceeds. 30%, she said. It's not nothing. No, it isn't. She looked at the pages for another moment. Who is the second witness? The one with the illegible signature? He was quiet. She looked at him. A man named Porter Webb, he said. He was the surveyor who did the original property assessment. He's the one who documented the water source and its location on the Caldwell property. Where is he now? That's the thing, Ethan said. He picked up one of the pages and put it down again. Crane spent 2 weeks trying to find him. Webb left the valley about 5 years ago. He's somewhere in Montana, reportedly, but Crane's contact up there hasn't been able to pin down a specific location. Eliza sat with that. Outside, the afternoon was going gray and cold, the light flattening the way it does in late October when the day gives up earlier than you think it should. From the yard, she could hear the ordinary sounds of the ranch. Someone working on something metal, a horse shifting in the near corral, the low exchange of voices between 2 of the hands, the ordinary machinery of the place continuing while this other thing sat on the table between them like a stone. Voss came here this morning, she said, and he was relaxed. Not aggressive, relaxed in the way that people are when they believe they have time on their side. He does have time on his side. Maybe. She looked at the letter from Crane. Or maybe he came here because something has changed and he wanted to gauge what I knew, what you knew. Ethan looked at her. Men like Voss don't make social calls, she said. Even threatening ones, even veiled ones. They don't spend effort unless the effort is calculated. She tapped the edge of one of the pages. He came here to look at me, to figure out how much of a problem I am, which means he thinks I might be a problem. Ethan was quiet for a moment. She could see him taking that in, turning it over, measuring it against what he knew about Voss. Why would he think that? He said carefully. Because I knew Vivian, she said. And Vivian knew this property. She knew its history. She was here when things were filed and documented. If she told me things... She paused. He doesn't know what she told me. He came to find out. The table between them was quiet. Did she? Ethan said. Tell me things? Yes. Eliza looked at the window, the gray afternoon, the last thin light. She told me about the water, she said. She told me about the survey. She told me there was a wooden post at the northeast corner of the property with a mark cut into it, the surveyor's mark, that documented the boundary of the water source. She told me Porter Webb had showed it to her personally because she had asked, and because Vivian asked questions until she got answers. She paused. She told me Webb was a thorough man who documented everything twice. Ethan had gone very still. She said, Eliza continued, slower now, that he had kept a personal record book, separate from the county filing. He told her it was his practice on every survey because county records had a way of becoming inconvenient when money changed hands. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before in this kitchen. This one had a shape to it, a direction. A personal record book, Ethan said. She described it. Small, green cover, his initials on the front. He'd shown it to her because she asked to see it. She said it had the full survey documentation, both witness signatures legible, dated. She looked at him. If that book exists and Crane can find Webb, the injunction falls apart, Ethan said. Fitch's procedural objection has no legs if there's a clean second record. Yes. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, looking out at the yard, at his land, at the thing he had spent 20 years building that a man with a practiced smile was trying to dismantle one legal technicality at a time. Why didn't you say this earlier, he said. Not accusing, genuinely asking. Because you hadn't told me what you had, she said. I needed to know what the problem was before I could know if what I knew mattered. He turned around. He looked at her with those dark eyes that were not closed anymore, or not entirely. Wire Crane tonight, she said. Tell him about the record book. Tell him to find Webb in Montana and ask specifically about a green-covered personal survey ledger with Webb's initials. She held his gaze. That's the thread. If Crane can pull it, the rest comes undone. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Vivian told you all of this, he said. She was thorough, Eliza said. She paid attention to things that mattered. It was one of the things about her. Something moved across his face that she did not try to name. It was the expression of a man confronting something he had not expected to find in the particular place he found it. All right, he said. I'll wire Crane tonight. He picked up the papers from the table and straightened them and went to his study, and Eliza sat in the kitchen for a moment with the bread cooling on the counter and the feeling, quiet and careful, that something had shifted, not just in the legal situation, but in the particular arrangement between herself and this man, and that shifting was something she was going to have to think about very deliberately, because it was the kind of shift that could go in several directions, and some of them were dangerous. She got up and started the supper. November came in hard. Not the dramatic hard of a winter storm, nothing you could point to and say, there, that is the moment things changed. Just the gradual tightening that the frontier did every year, the temperature dropping in increments small enough that you adjusted without noticing, until one morning you woke up and your breath made clouds inside the house before the stove had been lit, and you understood that the easy season was finished. Eliza had grown up in country that did winters properly, and she was not afraid of cold, but she respected it in the practical way that you respect anything that can kill you if you're careless. She reorganized the cold storage to maximize what they had. She made sure the kitchen fire was banked properly each night and revived properly each morning. She learned the patterns of the house's drafts, where the cold came in and where it didn't, which rooms lost heat fastest, and she managed against them with rugs and draft stoppers and the careful positioning of the stove's output. The ranch contracted with the cold, the way a living thing pulls in. The hands worked shorter outdoor days and spent more time in the bunkhouse in the evenings. The The cattle moved closer to the sheltered sections. The pace of everything slowed without stopping. Ethan was different in November. She couldn't have said precisely when she first noticed it, because it was gradual enough to mistake for the normal rhythm of the season. But he was in the house more, for one thing. The colder weather brought him in earlier from the outdoor work, and he had taken to spending his evenings at the large desk in his study rather than in the front room, which meant he was closer to the kitchen, which meant she was more aware of him. And she was increasingly aware of him. She was honest with herself about it, because she had found over the years that dishonesty with yourself was the most expensive kind. She was aware of Ethan Caldwell in the specific and inconvenient way that you become aware of a person when you have been living in close proximity to them long enough that the professional distance becomes harder to maintain naturally and has to be maintained deliberately. She was aware of the particular way he moved through the house that was different from how he moved through the yard, quieter, more careful, as if he understood that this was not his domain in the same way the land was. She was aware of the way he talked to his children, low and direct and without the particular condescension that some men applied to their dealings with the young. She was aware of the way he sat at the kitchen table when he came in for coffee in the mornings now, not just passing through but settling, pulling the chair out and sitting with his hands around the cup, and sometimes saying nothing at all, and sometimes saying something that turned into a real conversation before either of them had decided to have one. She was aware, and she was careful, and she kept the distance. It was Lily who tested the distance first. Lily had been studying the portrait in the upstairs hall. Eliza knew this because she passed the hall several times a day and had noticed the way Lily would stop in front of it, sometimes for only a moment, and sometimes for longer, with a particular quality of stillness that was different from the ordinary stillness of a child pausing in a corridor. It was the stillness of someone in conversation with something that couldn't answer back. The portrait was not large, perhaps 18 inches tall, painted on wood, and it showed a woman in her early 30s with dark hair and an expression that was caught between something serious and something that wanted to laugh, which was, Eliza thought, probably exactly accurate. She had looked at it once, carefully, early in her time at the ranch. She had not looked at it again. On a Tuesday in the second week of November, Lily found her in the kitchen in the late afternoon and sat down at the table with the particular posture of someone who has been working up to something. Eliza let her work up to it. "Do you think she watches us?" Lily said finally. "From the portrait. I know that's a child's question." "It's not a child's question," Eliza said. "It's a question." "What do you think?" Eliza considered. "I think portraits capture something real about a person," she said. "The expression, the way they held themselves. And I think when you love someone and you look at that, you feel them. That's real. Whether the watching is literal or not, the feeling is real." Lily was quiet for a moment. "She looks like she's about to say something funny." "She was funny," Eliza said. "Dry. She'd wait until you weren't expecting it, and then say something that took you a second to understand was a joke, and then you'd laugh and she'd look completely innocent." Lily stared at her. "You just described Dad." Eliza stopped what she was doing. She looked at Lily, and then, helplessly, she laughed. A real one, not managed, not considered. Lily's face broke open into a grin, startled by the laugh, pleased by it. "He does that," she said. "He waits, and then he says something and walks away before you finish laughing." "Yes," Eliza said. "He does." They looked at each other across the kitchen table, these two people who had come to each other sideways, and something settled between them that had not been settled before. Not dramatic, not announced, just settled. "I'm glad you're here," Lily said, and then immediately looked slightly horrified at having said it that plainly, which was also very Caldwell. "Me too," Eliza said, and went back to the stove. The wire from Crane came on a Thursday. Ethan brought it in from town himself, which he did not usually do. He sent one of the hands for the mail and the wires, and Eliza knew before he said anything that it was significant because he came directly to the kitchen and set it on the table and stood there while she read it. Crane had found Porter Webb. He was in a town called Grafton in southern Montana, working as an assayer, which was not surprising for a former surveyor. Crane's contact had reached him, and Webb had confirmed the existence of his personal record book. More than confirmed, he had produced it. He had it still, because Webb was, as Vivian had described him, a thorough man who kept his records. The book was intact. Both signatures were legible. The documentation was complete and clean. Webb had agreed to provide a certified copy to Crane's office. He had also agreed, if the case went before the circuit judge, to appear as a witness, which Crane noted in the wire with the particular excitement of a cautious lawyer allowing himself one exclamation point. Eliza read it twice and then set it down on the table. Ethan was watching her. Vivian was right about him, she said. He kept everything. Yes. How long to get the certified copy to Crane and then file it? 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said. Crane says once it's filed, the counter-motion to dismiss Voss's injunction has very strong legs. Fitch's procedural objection disappears. There's no illegible signature argument when there's a clean second record. And the main water rights case? Crane says it's over. The original filing plus Webb's documented record plus the property dates. Voss has nothing that survives a real challenge. He paused. I was always banking on the process, not the substance. Eliza sat with that for a moment. He's going to know soon, she said. When Crane files, Voss has eyes in the county office. I know. He's not going to take it gracefully. No, Ethan said. He isn't. She looked at him. What will he do? Ethan's jaw shifted. He'll come at me from another direction. That's what he does. He's been doing it for 20 years. He can't beat me on this, so he'll find something else. He looked at the wire. The question is what? She thought about the morning Voss had come to the back door, the relaxed smile, the careful words, the eyes that registered nothing of what was behind them. He'll come at you through the community, she said, not through the law. He's lost the legal angle, so he'll use the social one. He'll make noise about the ranch, about me, about... She stopped. Ethan was looking at her with an expression she could not entirely read. About us, he said quietly. The words sat in the kitchen between them. Neither of them said anything. It was the first time the word had been spoken in any form, and it was not even accurate. There was no us in the sense that the word implied. There was an employer and an employee, and a professional arrangement, and a shared table, and a complicated history involving a woman they had both loved in different ways. But the word had been said, and it could not be unsaid, and the fact that Ethan had said it and not avoided it told her something. He'll make it ugly, she said, keeping her voice even. He'll say things that can't be proved or disproved. That's the kind of damage that lasts even after the legal thing is settled. I know what he'll do, Ethan said. And? He looked at her directly. And I'm not going to let that change anything about how this ranch operates. She held his gaze. It might cost you, socially, relationships. People who won't want to take sides will take sides anyway. Let them, he said. You have children who live in this community, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I do. And the weight of it was in his voice. Not the decision, because the decision was apparently already made, but the cost of it. The full understanding of the cost. Nathan and Lily should know what's coming, she said. They shouldn't be caught flat-footed by what people say. I'll talk to them, he said. Tonight, she said, before the week's out. He nodded. She reached for the wire and folded it and handed it back to him. Wire Crane and tell him to move as fast as he can on the certified copy, she said. Every day before the filing is a day Voss has to maneuver. I'll go to the telegraph office tomorrow morning. Tonight, she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then something at the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but its shadow. You're not gentle about timelines, he said. No, she said. I'm not. He took the wire and went. The community response came faster than she had expected, which meant Voss had moved faster than she had expected, which meant he had known about Webb before the wire arrived, which meant he had contacts in Montana as well as at the county office, which was useful information about the kind of operation he ran. It began with small exclusions. Ethan was not invited to a ranchers' meeting at the Redstone Hall that he had attended every year for a decade. The omission delivered through the absence of a notice rather than an explicit disinvitation, which was worse because it could not be challenged directly. 2 business contacts in the valley made excuses about contracts that had been informally agreed. A man Ethan had considered a friend for 15 years came to the gate and talked to Deke and left without coming to the house, which Deke reported to Ethan with a flat expression that said what his words didn't. Ethan's response was to show up at the ranchers' meeting anyway. He walked in unannounced on a Wednesday evening, sat down at the table, and looked at the room with the expression of a man who had decided to make attendance itself the statement. Nobody asked him to leave. Several men nodded, one shook his hand. The man who had organized the meeting, a rancher named Colby, who Eliza had heard described as a weather vane, whichever way the wind, said good to see you without meeting Ethan's eyes and moved on. He came home that night and sat at the kitchen table, and Eliza gave him coffee and asked what happened. Nothing particular, he said. Did you say anything? I sat there, he said. I let them see I wasn't hiding. She nodded. Voss wasn't there, he said. He never comes to those meetings himself. That's how he works. He drank his coffee. The man who organized the meeting, Colby, came and spoke to me afterward. He said he'd heard things about the water rights dispute and that he hoped it resolved itself soon. Neutral, she said. Ostentatiously neutral, Ethan said, which in Colby's case means he's waiting to see which way it falls. They all are, she said. When Crane files and the injunction is dismissed, the neutrals will come back to you. And before that? She looked at him. Before that, you have Deke, and you have your land, and you have the hands who've been with you long enough to know what loyalty means. She paused. And you have the lawyer who's about to make Harlan Voss look like a man who filed a fraudulent objection to a legitimate claim. It wasn't technically fraudulent, he said. Crane was careful to say that. The signature was genuinely difficult to read. Voss knew when he filed it that the objection wouldn't survive a complete search, she said. He filed it because he thought the search wouldn't happen. The intent was clear even if the act was technically defensible. She looked at her hands. People who know him know that. The ones who matter will understand what happened. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. You've been thinking about this a lot, he said. Yes, she said. Why? He asked, and the question was plain, without the edge that might have made it accusatory. She thought about how to answer that honestly without crossing into the territory she was being careful about. Because this place and these people are my concern right now, she said finally. What happens here matters to me. He looked at her with those dark eyes. The 30-day arrangement was up 2 weeks ago, he said. She had not been tracking it consciously, but she had known. Yes, she said. You stayed. I stayed, she said. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man accounting for something. I'm glad you did, he said, with the plain simplicity of someone who does not usually say such things, and is therefore very precise when they do. She felt the warmth of it reach her, and kept very still, the way you keep still when something is happening that you don't want to frighten away. The bread tomorrow, she said, keeping her voice ordinary. Do you want the rosemary in it, or without? His mouth moved. With, he said. Lily will complain, but she eats it anyway. She does, Eliza said. She got up to bank the stove for the night, and he sat for another minute and then went down the hall, and she stood in the kitchen with the warmth of the fire at her back and something complicated and careful in her chest that she was not going to name yet, not until she had thought about it more, not until she was sure she understood what she was dealing with. It was Nathan who broke first, which was the one she had not predicted. She had expected it to be Lily, who wore her feelings closer to the surface even when she was trying not to. Nathan, she had thought, would take longer, would keep the wall up past the point where it was useful, the way 15-year-old boys often did when they had decided that feeling something was a form of defeat. She was wrong. It was a Saturday in the third week of November, a day with wind in it that rattled the back door and sent the temperature down hard, and Nathan had been out since early morning helping with the section of fence line that needed shoring before the first heavy freeze, which was real work, hard work, the kind that left you cold through to the bone even with the right clothes on. He came in at midday with his hands red and his face pale from the wind, and she had soup ready. The noodle soup Lily had requested on her second day, which she had made every Thursday since, and which had become quietly the soup the household expected on Thursdays, though this was Saturday, because the cold had looked bad that morning, and she had made it anyway. He sat down and ate without talking, and she refilled the bowl without being asked, and he ate that too, and then he sat there with his hands around the bowl, and she realized after a moment that he was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just sitting there with tears running down his face and his jaw set in the particular way of someone who has decided not to acknowledge what their body is doing. Eliza sat down across from him. She did not say anything. She did not hand him anything or touch his shoulder or do any of the things that are performed in the presence of someone's grief to demonstrate that you are witnessing it. She just sat there, which was sometimes the only thing that mattered. After a while, he said, in a voice that was almost ordinary, "I forgot what warm felt like." She waited. "Not the temperature," he said. He stopped. He was trying to find words for something that did not have easy words, and he was 15 and not accustomed to needing them. "The house felt cold after she died. Not the temperature, it was always warm enough, but it felt—" He shook his head. "Like nobody was tending it," Eliza said quietly. He looked at her. "Like the warmth was there, but nobody was putting it there on purpose," she said. "It just happened as a function of the stove and the walls, and not because someone was choosing to make it so." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "That." She nodded. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he said. "Because the soup's warm and the wind's bad, and sometimes things come out when you're cold and hungry, and then full," she said. "It's not complicated." He almost laughed. "It didn't come all the way out, but it was close. Dad never talks about her," he said. "I know. He talks around her, like she's a room he won't go into." He looked at his hands. "I'm the same way, I think. I do the same thing." "You just talked about her," she said. He thought about that. "Barely." "It's a start," she said. He looked at her with his mother's mouth and his father's eyes and 15 years of grief that had no good container, and she thought, "You are going to be all right, this boy. You are going to find your way through, and it is not going to be clean or fast or without cost, but you are going to get there." She didn't say any of that. She refilled his bowl a third time, and he ate it, and the wind rattled the door, and the kitchen was warm, and neither of them needed to say anything else. Crane's certified copy of Webb's personal survey record arrived on a Friday. Ethan brought the package from town and opened it at the kitchen table with Eliza and Deke present, because by that point the water rights situation had become a household matter in the full sense, something that touched everyone on the property, and that no one was pretending was only Ethan's concern. The record book was not the original. Webb had kept that, but the certified copy was notarized and witnessed, and exactly what Crane had described: complete, clean, both signatures present and legible. The water source documentation thorough enough to make Fitch's procedural objection look like what it was. Deke looked at it and said, "That's it then." "Crane files Monday," Ethan said. "He expects the injunction dismissed by end of the week." Eliza was looking at the copy. At the surveyor's careful handwriting, the precise measurements, the two signatures at the bottom of the key page. One of them Porter Webb's, and the other, clear as anything, the name of the original county commissioner who had since died, written in the firm hand of a man who had not imagined anyone would ever question it. "Voss will know when it's filed," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "What will he do?" Ethan folded the copy carefully and put it back in the envelope. "He'll do what men like Voss do when they've lost," he said. "He'll make noise. He'll make it personal. He'll say things I can't disprove because they're not legal claims, just atmosphere." She looked at him. "He's going to say I have feelings for you," Ethan said, with the directness of a man who had decided that the surest way through an uncomfortable thing was straight through it. "That I hired you because of that. That the whole Vivian connection was arranged." The kitchen was very quiet. "Let him say it," Deke said. "It'll stick to some people," Ethan said. "Some people will believe it regardless of what the truth is." "Some people always believe the worst of things," Deke said. "Those aren't the people worth accounting for." Ethan's eyes moved to Eliza. There was something in them that was not entirely the question it should have been, and was also not something she was going to address directly. Not here, not with Deke at the table. "File on Monday," she said. "Let the legal thing resolve. Everything else can be dealt with after." He held her gaze for a moment. "All right," he said. But the kitchen held the shape of what had almost been said, and Eliza felt it there long after Deke had gone out, and Ethan had gone to his study, and the afternoon had gone to evening, and the fire had settled low. She thought about Vivian, who had told her once in a cold room in Laramie that the hardest thing about loving someone was not the love itself, but the decision to stop being afraid of it. She thought about that for a long time before she banked the stove and went to bed. The night before Crane filed, Ethan came to the kitchen late. She was still up. She had been mending one of Lily's dresses by the kitchen fire, a small tear in the hem that would take 10 minutes and had somehow not gotten done for 2 weeks. And she heard him in the hall, and then he was in the doorway. And he was not moving the way he moved when he came for coffee or for the ordinary late evening exchange that had become their pattern. He was standing in the doorway with the particular stillness of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally run out of reasons not to say it. "I want to ask you something," he said. She set down the mending. "All right." He came and sat at the table across from her, and he put his hands flat on the surface in the way he did when he was trying to be precise, when he wanted to make sure nothing moved that shouldn't. "When I told you she'd have to leave," he said, and then stopped, which confused her for a moment before she understood. He was not talking about Eliza. He was talking about a conversation they had not had, a conversation that was coming, that was in the shape of things, that both of them had been aware of without naming. I was getting ahead of something. "Ethan," she started. "Let me finish," he said. "I've been thinking about what happens when the legal thing is settled and Voss says what he's going to say and the community decides what it decides." He looked at his hands. "I've been thinking about the 30-day arrangement that ended 2 weeks ago and the fact that we haven't talked about what comes after." She waited. "I don't want you to go," he said. It came out plainly, without the careful architecture of a man who usually chose his words like tools for specific jobs. Not because of the children, though that's real too. Not because of the kitchen or the household. He looked at her. "I don't want you to go, and I wanted you to know that before Voss makes noise and before people say things, and before any of that becomes a reason you might decide to leave on your own." The fire settled. The wind outside had died down from the afternoon, and the night was quiet in the way that late November nights are quiet, everything pulled in and still. She thought about what to say, and she thought about Vivian, and she thought about the careful distances she had been keeping and why she had been keeping them, and whether the reasons were real or whether they had been habits she had mistaken for reasons. "I'm not planning to leave," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not," she said. "Whatever Voss says. Whatever people decide. I'm not here because it's convenient, and I'm not staying out of inertia." "Then why?" he said. She thought about the east window in her room, about Lily's voice saying the biscuits were good, not as good as her mother's, but good, about Nathan's tears on a cold Saturday with 3 bowls of soup, about Vivian's apple cake, and the way Ethan had sat down at this table the evening she made it without knowing why he sat down, only that he had to. "Because this place needed tending," she said, "and so did the people in it, and I'm good at that. And somewhere in the week since I walked through your gate," she stopped. She looked at him directly because he deserved the direct version. "Somewhere in there it stopped being work and started being mine, not in the sense of ownership, in the sense of care." He was looking at her with something she was not going to look away from this time. "I don't know what comes after this," she said. "I don't know what Voss does or what the community decides, or what you decide, for that matter, when the noise settles and you can think clearly." "I think clearly now," he said. "Ethan." "I know what I'm saying," he said, and his voice was quiet but certain, the voice of a man who had weighed something against every argument available and still came out the same place. "I'm not confused. I'm not grieving my way into something. I know who you are, and I know what's happened in this house since you came, and I'm not asking you to be anything except what you already are." The fire. The quiet November night. The kitchen that smelled like the rosemary bread she had made that morning, and the faint ghost of apple spice that she thought would probably always live in the walls of this room now. She opened her mouth to answer, and the back door opened. Lily stood in the doorway in her nightgown and her hair loose, looking startled to find both of them awake at the same time, and then looking with 12-year-old accuracy at the quality of the air between them and deciding wisely to pretend she had noticed nothing unusual. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Is there any bread left?" Ethan looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at Lily. "Sit down," she said. "I'll cut you some." And the moment closed, not lost, but deferred, folded into the ordinary life of the kitchen, the bread, and the girl in the nightgown, and the fire going low. And Ethan sat back in his chair with something in his face that was not resolution and was not disappointment, but was something between them that had the quality of a thing that was not finished, that had only found its pause. Crane filed on Monday, as promised. By Wednesday, the news had moved through Redstone Valley the way news moved through a small community, not in one clean wave, but in a series of ripples, each one carrying a slightly different shape of the truth, depending on who was telling it and what they needed it to mean. The core of it held, the water rights injunction had been challenged with new documentary evidence, a personal survey record kept by the original surveyor, clean and complete and notarized and impossible to argue with in any court that intended to function honestly. The challenge had been filed. The circuit judge had been notified. Fitch's procedural objection was, in Crane's precise legal language, without sustainable foundation. Dick came in from town Thursday morning and sat at the kitchen table and told Eliza what he had heard, which was that the county office had been very quiet since Wednesday, and that Gerald Fitch had not been seen at his desk, which was either illness or the particular kind of absence that men arrange when they do not want to be asked questions they cannot answer without implicating themselves. "And Voss?" she said. "Quiet," Deke said, "which is when you watch him closest." She knew that. She had known it since the morning he came to the back door with his practiced smile and his careful words, since she had understood that he operated not in the open, but in the gap between what could be proved and what everyone already believed. The quiet lasted 4 days. It broke on a Sunday, at the general store, in front of enough people to make sure the story spread in the version he wanted. Eliza was not there when it happened. She heard about it from 2 separate sources before Ethan came home, which meant it had already taken the shape it was going to take in the community's telling before she could say a word about it. The first was Corbin, the young hand, who came to the kitchen door with the look of someone who has witnessed something uncomfortable and doesn't know who to tell. He told her in the halting way of someone reporting an accident, the words in the wrong order, the important parts buried in the middle, that Voss had been at the general store, and that Ethan had been there too, buying wire, and that Voss had said things, in front of Cecily Marsh and 2 other women and 4 men at minimum, that were not accusations but were not anything else either. What Voss had said, as Corbin reconstructed it, that he felt for Ethan, losing Vivian the way he had, and that he understood grief made a man vulnerable, and that he hoped Ethan was surrounded by people whose intentions were as good as their cooking, and that he for one had always worried about capable women who arrived in difficult men's households with convenient personal connections, and that he supposed time would tell. He had said it warmly, with the face of a man expressing genuine neighborly concern. That was the thing that made it stick. If he had said it with malice, people could have dismissed the malice. Saying it with concern made it a different kind of thing, the kind that settled into the space between what you know and what you suspect, and lives there quietly for a long time. Ethan had said nothing. This was the second thing Corbin reported, with the careful emphasis of someone who understood it mattered. Ethan had not responded. He had picked up his wire, paid for it, and left, which was probably the correct response in the legal sense. Anything he said could have been used as the basis of a further story, a further elaboration, but which in the social sense looked like a man who had nothing to say, and in a room full of people watching, having nothing to say read a particular way. Eliza thanked Corbin and sent him back to his work and stood in the kitchen for a few minutes thinking, and then she started the supper because the hour required it, and because standing still had never solved anything she could recall. Ethan came home later than usual. The children had already eaten. She had fed them at their regular time without comment, and Lily had asked where her father was, and Eliza had said he was in town on business, and Lily had accepted this with the particular acceptance of a child who has learned that adults carry things they don't always share immediately. Nathan had said nothing, which meant he had heard something from somewhere and was sitting with it. Ethan came through the back door at 7:30 and stood in the kitchen with the wire he had bought and his hat still on, and the specific set of his shoulders that she had come to recognize as the posture of a man who had been managing himself carefully for several hours and was running low. She was at the stove. She did not say anything immediately. He put the wire down. He took his hat off. He sat at the table. She poured him coffee and set it in front of him and sat across from him and waited. "You heard," he said. "Corbin told me. Then Mrs. Faber from the next property sent her girl over to say she'd heard and was thinking of us, which means she'd heard and wanted to know what I knew." He looked at the coffee. "I should have said something." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe not. What would you have said?" His jaw shifted. "I would have told him to watch his mouth in front of people who know what he actually is." "And that would have become the story," she said. Ethan Caldwell lost his temper in the general store defending the woman he hired. That's the version Voss wanted. I know, he said, roughly. I know that's why I didn't. I'm telling you what I wanted to do, not what I should have done. Those aren't always different things, she said. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. I'm sorry, he said. About what he said. About doing it in public. About the position it puts you in. It puts me in the same position it put me in 3 weeks ago, she said. The position hasn't changed. The audience for it has. It's going to be worse now, he said, before the circuit judge rules. Crane says 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3. Voss has 2 or 3 weeks to keep making this as uncomfortable as possible for everyone connected to this ranch. I know. He looked at his hands. If you wanted to, he stopped. He started again. If the arrangement had become more trouble than it was worth, I would understand. No quarrel. I said that at the start, and I meant it. She looked at him steadily. Are you asking me to leave? No, he said immediately. No, I'm not. Then don't offer it as a courtesy I should refuse, she said. If you want me here, say you want me here. I told you the other night I wasn't planning to go. That hasn't changed because Harlan Voss said something unkind in the general store. He was quiet for a moment. I want you here, he said. Good, she said. Then we move forward. He looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between gratitude and something more complicated, and she held it for a moment and then stood up and went back to the stove, because she was not ready yet for the more complicated, and she understood that was her limitation and not the situation's, but it was real all the same. Eat something, she said. There's stew. He ate. They didn't say much more, but the kitchen held the two of them in the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the late evening, and when she finally went to bed, she lay awake longer than she usually did, thinking about the way he had said, I want you here, plain and without decoration, the way he said all the things he actually meant. The following week was a test of endurance in the specific way that frontier communities tested people they had not yet decided about. Eliza went to town 3 times that week for necessary supplies, and each time she navigated the particular social geography of a place that was in the process of making up its mind. Some people were warm, warmer than they had been, actually, as if Voss's public performance had made them uneasy about which side of the line they were on, and they had decided discomfort was easier to manage with a clear choice. The Faber woman, who had sent her girl over, greeted Eliza at the store with the deliberate warmth of someone making a statement, and they talked for 10 minutes about winter storage and the price of flour, and it was the most normal conversation she had had in town since she arrived. Others were careful. The careful ones were the ones to watch. Not hostile, not warm, just precise in their distance, maintaining exactly enough cordiality to be able to say later they had never been unkind. Cecily Marsh was in the careful category, which was interesting given that she had been present when Voss spoke and had presumably processed it according to whatever system she used for processing things that came with social consequences. She did not avoid Eliza. She did not seek her out. She was the fabric counter and the thread and the neutral face of someone who was going to wait. Eliza let her wait. On Thursday of that week, a man named Rufus Hale came to the Caldwell gate. Eliza did not know him well. She knew the name, knew he ran a smaller ranch east of Redstone, knew he had a wife and 3 sons. But Deke showed him to the front room and then came to find Ethan and Eliza happened to be in the hall with a basket of laundry and heard the beginning of the conversation before she moved on. Hale had come to tell Ethan that he had spoken to the circuit judge's clerk in Barton Creek, who was the brother of a man Hale knew, and that the clerk had indicated the injunction matter was being moved up in the schedule because the documentary evidence Crane had filed was, in the clerk's words, not ambiguous. She stopped in the hall. Not ambiguous. 2 words that meant the same thing as over, just in the language of legal proceedings. She moved on with the laundry, and she let the information settle in her while she worked, and she thought about what it meant in the immediate term. The water rights were effectively resolved. The injunction would fall. Voss had spent the better part of 2 months constructing a legal challenge that had collapsed the moment a thorough surveyor's careful habits were brought to light. The cattle were safe. The East Range was not going anywhere. The Caldwell operation was intact. It should have felt like relief, clean and complete. It felt like the beginning of a different problem, because the water rights had been the thing everyone was focused on, the thing around which all the other tension had organized itself. Voss's pressure, the town's ambivalence, the whispers about Eliza's place at the ranch. When the water rights resolved, the official reason for the crisis disappeared, and what it left behind was everything that didn't have a legal resolution. What people believed, what they would keep believing, and the question of what exactly Eliza Vane was doing in the Caldwell household now that the crisis was over. She was still thinking about this when Ethan found her in the garden late that afternoon. The garden was cold enough now that she had put the main beds to rest for winter, covering the turned soil with straw against the freeze. She was working on the section of stone border that had come loose in the fall, resetting the stones the way she had seen them positioned in the summer photographs Lily had shown her once. Lily had a small collection of photographs from before Vivian died, which she kept in a box under her bed and sometimes took out and studied with the focused attention of someone trying to memorize something they are afraid of losing. Ethan came and stood at the edge of the garden and watched her work for a moment before he spoke. "Hale thinks the judge will rule by end of next week," he said. "I heard the clerk's assessment," she said, not stopping with the stones. "Not ambiguous." "No," he said, "it isn't." She set a stone. It fit correctly, and she moved to the next one. "Crane sent a wire this afternoon," he said. "He's confident, more confident than he's been in any of his previous correspondence, which from Crane means very confident." "Good," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him watching her work. "You're preparing the garden for spring," he said. "Yes." "That takes time, planning ahead." She looked up at him. He was watching her with a directness that meant they were not actually talking about the garden. "Say what you're saying," she said. He put his hands in his coat pockets. The afternoon was cold enough that his breath made small clouds in front of him, and the light was going early the way it did in late November, everything narrowing toward the short days. "When the judge rules, the reason for most of the tension in town goes away," he said. "People who were waiting to see which way it fell will see which way it fell. Some of them will come back around. Voss will lose his foothold." "Yes," she said. "But some things won't resolve on their own," he said. "The things Voss put into the air. The questions people are still carrying about why you're here and what this is." "I know," she said. "I want to answer those questions," he said directly, not through lawyers or legal filings or the fact of the ruling, directly. She was very still. "I want to make it clear," he said, "to the people in this valley that you are not here as an arrangement and not as a connection to Vivian and not as hired help that I've been. That Voss has made it seem like I've confused with something else." She stood up from the garden border and faced him. The cold afternoon between them, the stone wall in the dormant garden, and the house behind him with smoke coming from both chimneys. "What would making it clear look like?" she said carefully. "I'd like to bring you to the ranchers' meeting next month," he said. "Not as my housekeeper, as the person I'm asking to consider staying here permanently." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to decide anything now," he said quickly, and the quickness of it was very human, the rush of clarification that comes when you've said a thing and suddenly fear how it landed. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider it, and if the answer is that you need time, I understand that. And if the answer is that this was never, that you're not—" He stopped. He looked at the stone border. "I'm not trying to put you in an impossible position." "You're not," she said. He looked at her. "You're being honest," she said, "which is the only way I'd want this conversation to happen." The wind moved through the garden, dry and cold, stirring the straw on the winterized beds. "Ethan," she said, "I came through your gate in October with nothing, $6.40, a carpet bag that wasn't full, a connection to a woman I'd loved and lost that I hadn't told anyone about because I didn't have permission to grieve her publicly." She paused. "I was not looking for this. I want you to know that. I was not calculating." "I know that," he said. "I've known that since the first week. What I found here was—" She stopped. She tried again. "I found people who needed tending, and a place that needed warmth, and a kitchen that had been cold for too long. And I found that I was good at all of those things in a way that hadn't mattered to anyone in a long time." She looked at him directly. "And I found you, which I was not expecting, and which I have been careful about, because I did not come here for that, and I did not want to be the woman who walked into a grieving man's household and let something grow that he would regret later." He was very still. Will you regret it? She said. When the quiet comes back. When the legal thing is settled and Voss is contained and the household is running and there's nothing urgent. Will you look at this and think you moved too fast because you were grateful, or because the children needed something, or because it was winter and everything feels closer in the cold? He looked at her for a long time. No, he said. I won't. How do you know? Because I've been asking myself that question for 6 weeks, he said. Every time I started to say something and stopped. Every time you were in that kitchen and I found a reason to be there too. Every time you talked about this place, like it was something you were choosing, not something you'd settled for. He paused. Grateful doesn't feel like this. Convenience doesn't feel like this. She felt the truth of that reach her before she had decided to let it. I need a little time, she said. Not much. A few days. All right, he said, without hesitation, which was the right answer. She nodded. She bent back to the garden border and he stood there for another moment and then went back to the house. And she set stones until the light went and she could not see the edges anymore. And then she went inside too. The few days she had asked for were complicated by the fact that Lily chose them to be sick. Not seriously sick, a fever and a head cold, and the particular misery of a 12-year-old who had been running herself down with cold weather and insufficient sleep, but sick enough to require tending, which meant the theoretical space Eliza had asked for filled up immediately with the practical work of warm broths and cool cloths, and the specific negotiation of getting a child to rest. When resting is the last thing the child believes she needs, Lily was a bad patient in the endearing way of people who are rarely ill and therefore have not developed any tolerance for it. She wanted to be up. She wanted her book. She wanted to know what was happening in the kitchen and the yard and why she could hear Nathan doing something with a saw outside and what exactly the saw was for. She kicked the blankets off, and Eliza tucked them back and Lily kicked them off again within the hour. On the second day of this, Nathan appeared in the doorway of Lily's room with a piece of wood he had been carving, which turned out to be a small horse, rough-edged and approximate but recognizable. And he set it on the shelf next to Lily's bed without comment. And Lily looked at it and said it was lopsided, and Nathan said all horses were lopsided if you looked at them closely enough, and the argument occupied both of them for 20 minutes while Eliza changed the bedding. She watched these two children from across the room, this 15-year-old boy who had taught himself not to feel things and was quietly unlearning that, and this 12-year-old girl who had too many feelings and not enough places to put them. And she thought about how far they had come from the children she had first met in October. The absent boy who took apples from bowls, and the girl who tested adults to see if they would stay. And she felt something she did not have a clean word for, something that lived in the territory between love and responsibility, and was probably both. Ethan appeared at Lily's door that evening. He was not good at sick children, which was something Eliza had not known about him until now. He stood in the doorway with the particular helplessness of capable people in situations that cannot be solved by capability, holding a cup of tea that Eliza had asked him to bring up as much to give him something to do as because the tea was urgently needed. "How do you feel?" he asked Lily. "Terrible," Lily said. "You look better than yesterday." "I look terrible," Lily said, with emphasis. "You look like you're getting better," he said, firmly, which was the voice he used when he had decided something was true and was going to make it true through sheer commitment. Lily rolled her eyes. "You always say that when you don't know what else to say." He looked slightly stung. "I say it when it's accurate." "You said it when the Hereford bull got into the south fence and 3 planks were broken and you hadn't seen the full damage yet," Nathan offered from the corner helpfully. Ethan looked at his son. "Thank you for that." "The bull was fine. You were right about that part," Nathan said. Lily laughed, which turned into a cough, which she recovered from, and then laughed again. Ethan stood in the doorway with the tea looking at his children and at Eliza, who was at the bedside with the damp cloth in the bowl, and something moved across his face that she caught in her peripheral vision and filed away for later. She took the tea from him. "She'll sleep soon," she said. "You don't have to stay." He stayed anyway. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat in it and picked up Lily's book from the side table and read to her, which was not something she had seen him do before, and which Lily accepted with the sleepy contentment of someone who is getting exactly what they want and is too tired to pretend they don't want it. He read badly at first, a little stiff, a little self-conscious, And then, as Lily's eyes went heavy, he relaxed into it. And by the time she was asleep, he was reading at the natural pace of a man who had forgotten he had an audience, and his voice in the lamp-lit room was low and even, the voice she had heard described once as worth waiting for. She gathered the bowl and the cloth and left quietly. In the hall, she stood for a moment with her hands full and her chest full of something she was done pretending she hadn't decided yet. The circuit judge ruled on a Friday, which was, Eliza noted, the same day of the week that Harlan Voss had once set as a deadline, and which now belonged to a different outcome entirely. Crane's wire arrived before noon. It was the shortest wire he had sent in the entire proceeding. Injunction dismissed. Original claim upheld. Full documentation entered into permanent county record. The matter is concluded. Ethan read it twice and then set it on the kitchen table and sat down and put his hands flat on the wood and breathed. Deke came in from the yard and Ethan handed him the wire, and Deke read it and nodded once and said, "Good," in the way that men say things they mean with complete seriousness, but cannot allow themselves to say with more words than that. Corbin had apparently told everyone before Deke finished reading, because there was noise from the yard that sounded like relief expressing itself in the outdoor vocabulary of men who worked the land, and someone, it sounded like Miguel, the hand from the south section, who had an enormous laugh that he deployed rarely and memorably. Someone let out a whoop that bounced off the barn wall. Lily came downstairs, still pale and slightly unsteady on her second day of recovery, and asked what was happening. "The water rights are settled," Ethan told her. "We won." Lily looked at the wire on the table. "Is it over? With Voss?" "The legal part," he said. "The rest of it takes longer." She looked at him with 12-year-old directness. "Is Eliza staying?" Ethan looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at Lily. "Why do you ask it that way?" "Because the water thing was the emergency," Lily said. "And you came during the emergency. And I want to know if you're going to leave now that the emergency is over." She said it the way children say the things adults have been carefully not saying, which is directly and without any of the protective architecture that adults build around difficult truths. She said it standing in the kitchen doorway, in her wool socks, and her recovering from a cold pallor, and her dark eyes that were her father's eyes. And the room was very quiet. "I'm not leaving because the emergency is over," Eliza said. "But are you staying?" Lily pushed. Eliza looked at Ethan. He was watching her with the patience of a man who had asked a question several days ago and was still waiting and had not pushed, which was precisely the thing that had settled the decision inside her over the days since. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." Lily's face did something that only lasted a second before she pulled it back under control, but that second was vivid. Relief and happiness and a kind of hunger that had been waiting finally met. "Okay," she said, in the voice of someone pretending they hadn't been worried. "Good." She went back upstairs. Ethan did not say anything. He did not need to. The look he gave Eliza across the kitchen was plain and warm and private, and she held it for a moment, and then she turned to the stove because supper still needed making and the cattle still needed water, and the world did not pause for the conclusions of private conversations, even when those conclusions were the most important things that had happened in it for a very long time. Voss came to the ranch one more time. She had not expected it. She had expected him to process the ruling from a distance, to absorb the loss and redirect his operations elsewhere, the way men like him did when a front collapsed. Not retreating exactly, just opening a different door. She had expected silence and recalibration. What she had not expected was him at the front gate on a Saturday morning, alone this time, no men at his back, no practiced relaxation in his posture. Just a man on a horse looking like someone who had slept badly and decided to come anyway. Ethan was the one who went out to him. Eliza watched from the kitchen window because she was not going to pretend she wasn't watching, and there was nothing dishonest about watching from a kitchen window. She could not hear what was said. She watched the two men at the gate, Ethan standing, Voss on horseback, which was either a power position or the position of someone who had not committed to dismounting because dismounting meant staying, and staying meant the conversation was real. And she watched the exchange of words she couldn't hear and the particular body language of two men who have competed for 20 years and one of whom has just lost a significant round. It lasted perhaps 10 minutes. Then Voss turned his horse and rode back down the road without looking back, which told her something about what had been said, the not looking back of a man who has said what he came to say and does not want to see how it landed. Ethan came back inside. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the window over the sink for a moment, and then looked at her. "What did he say?" she said. Ethan pulled out the kitchen chair and sat down heavily, the way men sit when something has taken more out of them than they want to show. "He said he hoped I understood the objection had been in good faith," he said. "That the signature was genuinely hard to read, and he believed the filing was legitimate." "Did you believe him?" "No," Ethan said flatly, "but I let him say it." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because he also said he would not be pursuing further action against the Caldwell operation, on any front." He looked at his hands. "And because a man who's lost is still a man, and this valley's not big enough to carry a 20-year war without both sides bleeding to death over it." She looked at him. "I didn't forgive him," Ethan said quickly, reading her expression. "I want to be clear about that. I listened, and I said I heard him, and I said I expected him to be a man of his word about the further action." He paused. "That's not forgiveness. That's practicality." "It's also maturity," she said. "Which is harder." He made a face that said he was not ready to accept that description of himself. She almost smiled. "He said one other thing," Ethan said, and his voice shifted slightly. "He said he could see he'd been wrong about your intentions, about why you were here." He looked at the table. He didn't say it graciously. He said it like a man swallowing something he didn't want to swallow, but he said it. The kitchen held that for a moment. "That matters to you," she said. "That he said it in front of me?" "Yes." He looked at her. "That he understood it was wrong? I don't know if understanding is what he did, but he said it out loud and he'll say it to the right people, and that matters to you, whether or not it matters to him." She sat down across from him. "You went out there partly for me," she said. "I went out there for the ranch," he said, "and for my children. And yes, for you." He said it without flinching and without looking away, and she understood that this was how he was. Not a man who softened truths into easier shapes, but a man who had decided what was true and said it plainly, and that whatever difficulty lay in the plain truth was something he was willing to stand in front of. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "and I should have told you sooner." He waited. "When I came to the valley," she said, "I had heard about Vivian, that she'd passed. I knew she was gone before I arrived in Redstone. And when I saw the notice for the housekeeper position," she paused. She was going to say it correctly. "I applied because I needed work and because I had nowhere else to go, and those things are completely true. But they're not the only true things." She looked at him directly. "Part of why I walked up that road to your gate was because of her. Because she had loved this place and these people, and she had told me about it. And when I read that notice, I thought I wanted to see what she had built her life around." Ethan was very still. "That's not calculation," she said. I need you to know that. It wasn't strategic. It was—" She searched for the word. "It was the closest I could get to saying goodbye to her properly, to seeing the things she loved." She paused. "I didn't expect to find what I found." He was quiet for a long moment. "What did you find?" he said, and the question was careful and genuine. "I found it was everything she said it was," she said, "and I found that she was right about you, about the laugh, about the work, about the box with the lock." She looked at him. "And I found that this was somewhere I wanted to be, which was not something I had expected to feel about any place for a very long time." He was looking at her with the open expression she had seen on his face for the first time that night in the kitchen when the apple cake was in the oven. Not closed, not managed, just present, just there. "She would have wanted this," he said quietly. "Not about them specifically, not making it about the future, just the fact of Eliza here, the house warm, the children eating, the kitchen smelling like food." "I know," Eliza said. "I know she would have." They sat at the table in this kitchen that had been cold for years and was not cold anymore, and the afternoon light came through the window at its low November angle, and somewhere outside Nathan was doing something with the saw again. And from upstairs they could hear Lily moving around her room, recovered and restless, probably reorganizing her bookshelf for the 4th time this month, which was what Lily did when she was feeling well enough to be bored. The ordinary music of a house that was alive. Ethan reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not clasping it, just placing it there, warm and careful, and without any requirement that she do anything about it immediately. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen, in the quiet, in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of two people who had found each other sideways, through grief and necessity, and the careful handwriting of a surveyor who kept two copies of everything. Outside, Miguel laughed at something, that enormous laugh that bounced off the barn wall, and Nathan's saw went quiet, and from upstairs Lily's voice called down, asking if there was any of the apple cake left, and Eliza called back that she would make another one tomorrow. And the house settled into the late afternoon with the particular ease of a place that has remembered what it is for. Eliza made the apple cake again on a Sunday in December, 3 weeks after Voss rode away from the gate and did not look back. She made it the same way she had made it the first time. The apples cut thin, the cinnamon and nutmeg in their particular ratio, the small dark measure of molasses that looked wrong in the bowl and was right in everything else. The kitchen filled with the same smell it had filled with on that October afternoon, the smell that had stopped Ethan in the doorway like something had reached through all his years of careful distance and taken hold of him by the collar. This time he did not stop in the doorway. He came and sat at the table and watched her finish it, which was its own kind of change, from a man who had to be ambushed by warmth to a man who walked toward it on purpose. Lily came in and leaned against the counter and stole apple slices and was told to stop and stole more anyway. Nathan appeared at the kitchen door with the small carved horse he had made for Lily's sick day shelf. Except this one was better. He had made a second one, more careful, the proportions more honest. And he set it on the windowsill without explaining why, then sat at the table and pretended he was only there because there was nothing else to do, which fooled no one, and he knew it. The four of them were in the kitchen while the cake baked, and it was ordinary in the way that the most important things usually are. So ordinary you could miss it if you were looking for something larger. Eliza did not miss it. The winter that year was harder than the previous two, which the older hands said they had expected because the fall had been too mild, that nature had a way of balancing its accounts. The cold came in earnest in December and stayed, and 3 ranches in the surrounding territory lost cattle to a freeze that came fast in the second week of the month, faster than anyone had prepared for. Eliza heard about it from the Faber woman, who came to the gate on a Tuesday morning with the news delivered in the compressed way of someone who had been managing their own fear long enough to speak around it. 2 families in the eastern section had lost a third of their herds. A third family, the Pruitts, no relation to the former housekeeper, had lost a water line to the freeze and their remaining cattle were in trouble. She listened to everything and then she went to find Ethan. He was already moving by the time she reached him because Deke had told him from a different source 20 minutes earlier, and Ethan was not a man who heard about a neighbor's cattle dying and stayed indoors. He was organizing the hands, calculating what the ranch could spare, feed, line supplies, 2 of the ranch's sound water installations that could be temporarily redirected. The Pruitts need someone who knows how to reroute a line in a freeze, Eliza said. Miguel did it last year on the south section, Ethan said. Send Miguel and Corbin, she said, and send the extra feed we have in the east barn. We can manage without it through January if we're careful with portions. He looked at her. That's 3 weeks of buffer. The Pruitts have children, she said. He looked at her for one more moment and then said, Miguel, Corbin, east barn feed, to Deke, who was already nodding. She went back to the kitchen and spent the morning cooking, not for the Caldwell household, but for the families who were going to be working outside in the freeze all day and would come home to cold stoves in no time. She made 2 large pots of stew and 4 loaves of bread and wrapped them in cloth, and Corbin loaded them onto the supply wagon without being asked, because Corbin had become the kind of young man who noticed what needed doing and did it, which she considered one of the small private accomplishments of the past 2 months. By evening, the Pruitt water line was functional. The feed had been distributed. 3 families who had been in crisis that morning were in a position to get through the week. Cecily Marsh came to the Caldwell gate the following Thursday. Eliza answered the door herself, and Cecily stood on the porch with a tin of preserved plums and an expression that was not comfortable for her, which meant it was real. I wanted to bring these, Cecily said, and to say that what you did for the Pruitts and the others, what this ranch did, was noted. She paused. I have not always been generous in my thinking about you. I wanted to say that as well. Eliza held the tin. Thank you, she said, for the plums and for the other. Cecily nodded. It was not a friendship established. They were not built for friendship, the 2 of them. The chemistry wasn't there. But it was something real and honestly arrived at, which was worth more than performed warmth, and both of them knew it. She told Ethan about it at supper, and he said, "Plums," in a considering tone, and Nathan said he liked plums, and Lily said she liked them better in a tart than straight from the tin, and the conversation moved on. Well, the ranchers' meeting in January was the one Ethan had mentioned in the garden, the one where he had said he wanted to bring her not as his housekeeper, but as something else. She wore the dress that Vivian had helped her mend, the one she had kept through every move and every difficult year, because some things you don't give up even when you can't explain why. She had let it out slightly at the seam and pressed it, and it fit correctly, and it was not the finest dress in the room, but it was hers, completely hers, and she walked into the Redstone meeting hall beside Ethan Caldwell, with her head level and her hands steady. People looked. That was inevitable, and she had prepared for it. Some of the looks were curious, some were warm, some were the careful neutral of people still deciding. She met all of them with the same expression, which was the expression of a woman who had made her choices with her eyes open and was not asking permission for them. Colby, the weather vane, shook her hand and said he'd heard about the Pruitt situation and that the valley was lucky to have a ranch that remembered what neighbors were for. It was politicians' warmth, calibrated and strategic, but even calibrated warmth is warmth, and she accepted it at face value because that was the practical thing to do. Rufus Hale's wife, a steady-eyed woman named Dorothea, sought her out near the end of the evening and said simply that she was glad Eliza had stayed, and that the valley had more room for capable women than it usually admitted to. They talked for 20 minutes about the freeze, about feed management, about what the spring planting looked like from a kitchen's practical perspective. And it was the most useful conversation Eliza had had in a public setting since arriving in Redstone, and she walked away from it thinking that this was what she had wanted without knowing she wanted it. Not to be accepted as an extension of the Caldwell name, but to be known as herself, Eliza Vane, who had something to say that was worth hearing. Ethan found her near the door at the end of the evening. "How bad was it?" he said, which was his version of asking how she was. "Not bad at all," she said. "Dorothea Hale is a practical woman." "She is," he said. I was quiet for a moment, looking at the room that was beginning to disperse, people pulling on coats and exchanging last words. "I want to ask you something." "You've said that before," she said. "And you've answered honestly both times," he said. "So I'll keep asking." She looked at him. "I want to ask you to stay," he said. "Not as an arrangement, not on a 30-day trial, not because the household needs managing. I want to ask you as—" He stopped, and the pause was human and honest. The pause of a man who has chosen the plainest words and is making sure they're the right ones. "I want you to stay as mine, if that's something you want." The meeting hall around them was warm and loud with departures, and she was standing in it in Vivian's mended dress, and it was January, and the water rights were settled, and the cattle were sound, and the kitchen at the Caldwell Ranch smelled like rosemary bread most mornings. "I've been yours since about the 3rd week of October," she said. "I just needed you to catch up." He almost laughed. It came out. The real one. The full one. The laugh that Vivian had said was worth waiting for. And she heard it, and she understood completely what Vivian had meant, because it was a laugh that had nothing held back in it, nothing managed, just a man genuinely surprised by joy. "The 3rd week," he said. "The bread on Thursday," she said. "You ate 3 pieces and then sat there for an extra 20 minutes pretending to read those legal papers." "I was reading those papers." "You were on the same page when you put them down as when you picked them up," she said. He looked at her with something warm and clear in his face. "You notice everything," he said. "I always have," she said. "It's one of the more useful things about me." He offered her his arm and she took it, and they walked out into the January night together, which was cold and clear and full of stars that had been there all winter and were only now visible because the cloud cover had finally broken. There are things that cannot be resolved cleanly. That is the truth nobody tells you at the start of the hard seasons. That some grief does not end, it only changes shape. That a man can love a woman who is gone and still build something real with a woman who is present, and that the second love is not a replacement for the first, but a different thing entirely, with its own weight and its own rightness. Vivian Caldwell's portrait still hung in the upstairs hall. It always would. Lily still stopped in front of it sometimes, still had that quality of stillness that was a conversation with someone who couldn't answer. Ethan still had mornings when the first light came through the window at a certain angle, and he went somewhere private inside himself for a few minutes before coming back. Nathan still carried things quietly, still processed grief in the long, slow way of people who have decided to do it honestly rather than fast. None of that was fixed by a woman who knew an apple cake recipe. None of it was supposed to be. What Eliza had brought to the Caldwell ranch was not a cure and was not a replacement and was not even exactly hope in the way that word usually gets used, as if hope is a thing you receive from the outside, a gift that arrives and changes everything. What she had brought was attention, presence, the willingness to sit in a cold kitchen in October and stay past the 30 days and set stones in a garden that wouldn't bloom until spring and make soup on days that weren't soup days because the cold looked bad and someone might need it. She had brought the ordinary, unglamorous work of choosing to care about something. And it turned out that was what the place had been missing, not because Ethan or Nathan or Lily were incapable of it, but because caring about something requires being willing to be hurt by it, and they had all been hurt enough that the willingness had gone thin. She had not fixed them. She had stayed long enough that they fixed themselves, which is the only way it actually works. The apple cake stayed in the Caldwell kitchen. Lily learned to make it properly by February, which is to say she made it 3 times, and it came out wrong twice and right once. And the once was enough to teach her hands what her head already knew. By spring she could do it from memory, and she did on Sunday afternoons, with the same particular absorption that Eliza brought to every kitchen task. The concentration of someone who understands that making something worth eating is a form of saying, I am here, and I am paying attention, and you matter enough for this trouble. Nathan made a 3rd carved horse, better than the 2nd, and gave it to Eliza without explanation on a Tuesday in March. And she put it on the kitchen windowsill next to the one he had left for Lily, and she said thank you, and he said it was nothing much, and they were both pretending that was true, and neither of them believed it. The East Range of the Caldwell property remained Caldwell property. The water rights were entered into the permanent county record, clean and unchallenged. Gerald Fitch resigned from the county commissioner's office in February, citing personal reasons. Harlan Voss did not pursue further action against the ranch, as he had promised, and was not a large presence in Eliza's life from that point forward, which is the best outcome you can hope for with men like Voss. Not defeat exactly, just the quiet of someone who has moved their calculations elsewhere. Deke stayed. Corbin stayed and grew a proper mustache by summer, which he was unreasonably proud of. Miguel's laugh continued to bounce off the barn wall at regular intervals and remained one of the more reliable sounds in the daily life of the ranch, the sound of a man who worked hard and found things genuinely funny, which is rarer than it should be. Spring came, as spring does without asking permission and without being particularly graceful about it, muddy and cold, and then suddenly warm, and then cold again, the garden coming back in fits and starts, the mint in the corner returning for another year as if it had never considered doing otherwise. Eliza planted tomatoes and herbs, and in the back corner of the east bed she planted a small apple tree from a graft of the old orchard stock, which would not produce fruit for several years, and she knew that, and she planted it anyway. Some things you start before you need them. That had always been her understanding of the work, and it turned out it was also her understanding of the life. She was 31 years old when she walked up the road to the Caldwell gate with $6.40 in a carpet bag that wasn't full. She did not know then what she was walking toward, only that she had run out of other directions and that the morning light was behind her and the road went where it went. It went here. That is, in the end, what she would have said to anyone who asked her what she had learned from all of it. Not that love finds you when you stop looking, because that is the kind of thing that is said and means nothing, but that the places you end up when you've run out of choices are sometimes the truest places you ever find. That warmth in a house is not a given. It is a practice, daily, imperfect, requiring someone to choose it every morning and not stop choosing it when it gets difficult. And that the people worth staying for are the ones who, when you tell them the truth, sit with it quietly and don't try to turn it into something easier than it is. The Caldwell Ranch in the valley below the Flat Sky Hills. The kitchen with the east-facing window. The old recipe, still there, no longer a ghost of something lost, but the living proof that what mattered in Vivian Caldwell had not disappeared. It had found its way, through memory and miles in one woman's determined walk up a cold October road, back to the place it had always belonged.